Shaggy stretched as he walked down the sun-dabbled streets. The road and the sidewalks were still empty save a few cars, but Shaggy was sure he spotted a shape ducking into various buildings. He could see shapes moving behind window blinds and smoke raising from some buildings. The neighborhood was still inhabited, but it seemed its denizens were keeping their heads down. Of course, the random sounds of laser and gun fire probably had a lot to do with it. Not to mention the crashing sounds of mutants, aliens, and magic users throwing their power around. The gangs of the neighborhood were putting up staunch resistance to the HLO shadow troopers. Even as he lowered his arms from his stretch, Shaggy spotted several armored people moving along the rooftops. Thankfully, they didn't seem to be focused on him. But the sounds of a battle a few streets over perked his inner wolf up a bit. Shaggy shoved the beast back down and kept walking. He'd been on his feet for almost an hour, starting his walk up near a derelict public building near Brentwood. From there, he headed south, checking all the streets and alleys for any sign of traffic. A few cars cut through the area, but nothing in the way of construction trucks. He was reaching the edge of Triangle State and Rosedale when he spotted the first bit of traffic congestion he'd seen all day. Some of the white armored thugs were in the middle of the four-way, directing traffic. Judging by the way the alien soldier was waving, Shaggy guessed they were shunting people away from the neighborhood. The light at the intersection feebly blinked red, but no one seemed to pay it any mind as cars zoomed around each other. A large 18-wheeler truck was sitting in the middle of the intersection and Shaggy groaned when he spotted it. It had Frank's construction company logo on the side. Shaggy jogged closer, noting the 8 other armored troopers around the intersection. A few had already clocked him as he approached the truck in the center of the intersection. But no one was stopping him. A very tall green woman in white armor was speaking to the driver as Shaggy moved closer. But a hand on his shoulder pulled him up short. Surprisingly, the strength of his assailant pulled Shaggy up short. Turning, he saw a gray and black ogre in the HLO's armor glaring down at him. "You don't belong here," the ogre rumbled. Shaggy bit back his sarcastic remark and jerked his shoulder out of the alien's meaty grip. "Yeah? Well, who belongs anywhere?" The ogre seemed to go cross-eyed as he thought about what Shaggy said. So used the few seconds of confusion to dart around the big alien and approach the truck again. Soldiers all around seemed to all talk into their personal comms at once as Shaggy moved around the truck. "Sir, again. No construction is ongoing in the neighborhood. We need you to move along," the alien woman was saying. Shaggy gave the truck's driver a wave as he got closer. Surprisingly, it was Frank himself. "I don't know about that. Our deli, a few blocks over, actually requested this truck a while ago. Now why would you lot be stopping traffic like this?" The 7-foot woman whirled and glared down at him. She was the same species as the professor's friend Claire. The super-strong alien with the accent. Except this one had a chubbier face and seemed younger somehow. She sneered down at him as she loomed above. "That is none of your business, mutt. I suggest you get out of here before we call the police." Shaggy's smile got larger. "Oh yes, let's call them. I wonder how they are going to react to you unlawfully stopping traffic." "Hey, Frank. How about you call them for us, huh? I think they are going to care more about a wanted fugitive casually walking the streets." Shaggy held a hand to his chest, pretending to be wounded. "Me? A fugitive? How dare you, madam? I assure you I am a law-abiding citizen of Austin. I'm sure the police can straighten all of this out. Should we wait for them?" The alien woman seemed ready to argue the point. But with a sudden jerk of her head, she backed up a few steps. Covering her mouth and turning her head, she held a conversation through her helmet mic as Shaggy moved toward the truck's driver's side door. "Having fun, Frank?" Shaggy waved the man off as he looked around. Multiple cars were jammed up behind Frank's truck, their drivers glaring at the troopers. The HLO's thugs were meandering around the intersection, weapons out for everyone to see. A few cars swerved around Frank's truck, but mostly, people were waiting. When the alien woman stood up straight again and turned back to Shaggy, she wore a face full of hatred. Her green skin was a darker shade from the clear anger on her face. Through clenched teeth, she spat. "Take your truck and get out of here." Shaggy blinked for a few precious seconds before he put on a neutral expression. Glancing up at Frank, Shaggy waved for the truck to pull forward. The troopers scattered as Shaggy leapt onto the side of the truck and they drove through the intersection. Behind them, the sounds of screeching cars and honking horns grew louder. Shaggy turned to see other cars trying to fly past the stoplight. The soldiers were having a rough time keeping all the cars in check and it almost became a multi-car pileup. Hanging off the driver's side door, Shaggy glanced up at Frank. "Call the police, Frank. Tell them something weird is happening at the 45th Street. Doesn't work." Frank called through the open window. "They've been doing it for a while now. The cops just say that they are private security for the mayor and that CEO slimeball." Shaggy fell into thought as the truck continued down the road. "How about news outlets? You contact any of them?" "Of course not. Most of them are off following the same people." "Good. Contact every news agent you can and tell them how disruptive Ozaria's security is being to the neighborhood." Frank gave Shaggy a glare through the window. His hands were still on the truck's steering wheel. With a sigh, the pudgy man smacked something on his center console. Frank followed Shaggy's instructions, placing several calls while they traveled the short distance to the deli. Most of the outlets seemed like they had better things to do, but a few were biting. The news that the HLO was blocking off an entire block would get a couple of more fringe journalists. Shaggy didn't care. Word of mouth was good enough. They needed as many eyes on the neighborhood as possible. Not just because that's what the troopers didn't want, but because more eyes meant more people. The curious and the aspiring gangs would see a territory not currently being patrolled by the HLO. Then they would come running. Frank was placing his fifth call on the truck's comm system when the giant 18-wheeler swerved violently. Shaggy gripped his handhold tighter as his feet left the slim truck step. When Frank got control of the truck again, Shaggy glanced down the thing's length. A black scorch mark marred the truck's white side. Another blast of red laser fire slammed into the side of the truck and sent them swerving. Shaggy was surprised to see a blue flash of a shield flare into life as the blast hit them. The laser still scorched their side, but thankfully nothing else was damaged. "Where are they?" Frank yelled as he wrestled with the wheel. Shaggy glanced around until he spotted two white armored troops on a roof. The pair were rapidly venting a large shoulder-mounted laser weapon. Growling, Shaggy spun back to Frank. "You know where you're going?" "Yeah?" As soon as he got the answer, Shaggy flung himself from the truck and rolled onto the street. He sent a general SOS to his pack, not knowing who would receive it. But he gave them as much info as he could while he slid to a stop in the street. His pants and shirt were shredded from the road, but Shaggy ignored it as he spotted the two soldiers aiming down the street at Frank again. Dashing across the street and to the building, Shaggy launched himself at its side, claws out. Another blast of red laser fire careened down the street. But Shaggy didn't even look to see if Frank was okay. Instead, he pounced his way up the building, using his claws to catch himself. He didn't hear any crashing, so he figured the construction worker was safe. With a final pounce, Shaggy cleared the edge of the roof and landed, crouched and ready to fight. But the two soldiers were running south. The pair pulled sidearms and fired at him as they jumped over to the next building. Shaggy growled as the green lasers pelted him. His inner wolf roared at their prey, getting away. Agreeing, Shaggy bolted after the pair. It had been a while since he had killed something and this prey seemed to stubbornly want to stick around. Shaggy gave chase, knowing that the pair were probably leading him somewhere. Running to the southern edge of the building, Shaggy pounced across and skidded to a stop. He ducked as much of the green laser blasts as he could. But for the most part, his shirt was being burnt to ashes by the lasers. Half-naked yet again, Shaggy followed them across multiple rooftops. With their full-body white armor, Shaggy couldn't tell if they were human or aliens. But with the way the pair cleared the gaps between buildings, Shaggy guessed they were at least powered. But Shaggy was gaining on them. With judicious use of his pounce ability, Shaggy cleared sizable gaps across the roofs. With each jump, Shaggy got closer and closer to the pair of troopers. Unfortunately, the soldiers saw it too. They kept up a steady stream of laser fire when they had first started running. But now the pair were focused solely on running away. When Shaggy cleared the next gap between buildings, one of the two turned to look back and tripped. With savage glee, Shaggy targeted the armored bastard and pounced. Instead of getting to their feet, the trooper blocked the gaps in their armor with their arms. Shaggy's claws hit the soldier's arm guards and slid across them, leaving large claws marks across the gauntlet's white finish. "Mark," the second trooper yelled. Shaggy did his best to wrench the man's arms out of the way. Once he did, the tan-skinned Mark gave a shout to his compatriot. "Run! Get to the URK!" Shaggy's long claws found the man's chin, and he jammed them up and through. With an almighty pull, Shaggy ripped the front of Mark's face off. Standing and turning, Shaggy saw the second trooper fleeing across the rooftops. His inner wolf partially sated for now, Shaggy thought about where the bastards were leading him. They had cleared 2 streets and multiple buildings before Shaggy finally nabbed one of the bastards. They were getting deeper into Rosedale, and the houses and streets were getting louder. A shiver went up Shaggy's spine and he listened to his senses, even as his wolf roared its disagreement. He started running north again and tossed himself off the roof. But he wasn't thinking about staying on the roofs. Instead, he aimed for a window in a squat building and pounced. A buzzing filled the air as Shaggy's body slammed into and through a window. "Ah!" A feminine scream filled the room. Shaggy looked around to find himself in a small square room. At the room's center, a table sat with a naked man laying on it. Next to the table was a reddish-purple alien woman with tentacles for arms. She had screamed when Shaggy came bursting through the window. Noting the suction marks on the naked man's back and the towel across the man's waist, Shaggy asked, "Massage?" Both the human man and the alien woman nodded idly as the drone's buzzing increased. Shaggy winced as the loud buzzing got louder. With a quick wave, Shaggy ran out of the room and into the long hallway. Following it, Shaggy found himself in the lobby and then outside. Ignoring the pedestrians' looks, Shaggy slowed to a jog and continued northward. Hopefully, anyone who spotted him would think he was a half-naked jogger, out for a morning running. But the drone's buzzing persisted as he crossed the next block. Shaggy chanced a glance over his shoulder and he spotted the 3 silver HLO drones roaming the skies. Thinking quickly, Shaggy turned westward and headed into the residential area. A half-naked guy doing laps around people's homes was more acceptable than a dude running through businesses. Once Shaggy had crossed a few streets, he again turned northward. The buzzing drones were in the distance now, and he didn't think they'd follow him into his neighborhood. The HLO didn't want a recording of the state of the place. He wouldn't be surprised if the city government and the HLO were suppressing the news coming out of the place either. They wanted people blissfully unaware of the happenings in that area. It was as he was crossing 45th again, the drone's a distant memory, that something slammed into him. Shaggy felt his spine snap, and he went flying across the street. He crashed through the wall of an abandoned paper company and collapsed into a heap. His spine healed and Shaggy groaned as he rolled over. He tried to be quick, but the pain in his side flared, even as his healing repaired the damage. Looking at the hole in the wall, Shaggy waited for his assailant to present themselves. But instead, all he heard was the wind and the distant sound of cars. With a grunt of effort, Shaggy pulled himself to his feet and waited. But nothing happened. Slowly, Shaggy reached into his pocket and pulled out a candy bar. Senses poised, Shaggy quickly devoured the food and sighed as the chocolate filled his mouth. He turned to walk through the building, the feeling of eyes on him still making his hair stand on end. But Shaggy pretended to ignore it as he kept his muscles ready. The next hit came with a flash of orange and an almost playful roar. Shaggy's right side exploded in pain and he was flung out of the building. This time through the side wall. Shaggy crashed through the alley and into the opposite building. Standing, Shaggy grew his claws and looked around. Whoever was attacking him had a dangerous mix of speed and strength. I don't know who you are. But I don't have time for games. What do you say we just fight this out and be done with it? A deep chuckle filled the abandoned hall he was standing in. It looked like an old dance studio, with a large mirror filling both sides of the room. But even with the mirrors reflecting everything, Shaggy still couldn't see his attacker. Oh, but I like games, said the almost booming voice. Playing with my prey is such fun. Shaggy's inner wolf practically raged at being called prey. Shaggy himself didn't feel too hot about it either. Especially within his current position, where he did, in fact, feel like prey. His wolf snorted even as Shaggy spun to find the voice. But the empty room echoed and Shaggy couldn't pin the guy down. Taking a whiff of the air, Shaggy recoiled as a chemical stench hit his nostrils. He almost gagged as the booming voice laughed. Ha 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 ha. What's a matter, little doggy? Catch a scent you didn't like? Ah, poor puppy. Shaggy growled as he wiped his nose. He grew his claws and crouched low, waiting. The bastard was going to hit him again, for sure. Shaggy watched the mirrors and waited, trying to use his abilities to find the guy. But enhanced focus and perception manipulation only worked with the senses he was already using. If his eyes and nose couldn't find the target, both abilities were almost useless. But once the guy moved, Shaggy zeroed in with everything he had. A brown and orange blurred flashed in the mirror behind Shaggy. Using his enhanced focus to catch as much detail as possible, Shaggy spun and swiped his claws. He felt a tug on his left hand even as he was sent skidding across the dance studio floor. Shaggy rolled to his feet and checked his memory of the attack. But it was pointless, as his attacker had pulled to a stop after Shaggy had hit him. The large tiger man was grinning, even as a large gash in his cheek bled over his brown trench coat. The tiger humanoid wiped an orange and black furred thumb over the wound. Shaggy saw the glint of the tiger man's claws as the slash on his back healed. But his eyes widened as the gash on the tiger man's face also slowly closed. The tiger licked the blood off his thumb and smiled at Shaggy. That was a good one, little doggy. But not good enough. With the tiger man's declaration, he disappeared. Swirling motes of dust were the only sign that the big tiger humanoid had moved. Shaggy braced himself and tried to focus, but the blow still came from right in front of him. A knee was slammed into Shaggy's stomach and he was lifted bodily from the ground. Instead of rocketing backwards, though, Shaggy felt the tiger man grab his leg and slam him back onto the floor. A burst of air escaped Shaggy's lips, and he flailed with his claws. But his assailant disappeared again. Getting to his feet, Shaggy tried to watch the mirrors again. But the orange and brown blur of the tiger man was dashing all over the place. Shaggy crouched low and stood sideways, clawed hands out in either direction. When the tiger's blurry movements got close, Shaggy would swipe with his claws. But every time, he hit nothing but air. Ha 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 ha. The tiger's booming voice echoed through the dance hall. They told me you would be much more trouble than this. But I'm not going to complain about being overpaid. With another gust of wind, Shaggy felt someone behind him and spun. But he was still too slow. A large orange and black-furred fist slammed into his chest and Shaggy went flying. This time he careened out the north wall, cracking the mirror wall as he went. He sailed out onto the street as his healing pushed out shards of glass from his body. Okay. Got to pull out the stops on this one, Shaggy thought as he lay in the street. He sent waves of his frustration straight down into his caged inner wolf, letting the beast gorge itself on his feelings. A warm feeling suffused Shaggy's body as he felt all his angry and frustration leave him. He sighed loudly and slowly got to his feet. Idly, he spotted the trench-coated tiger sauntering his way. The asshole was smiling happily as he passed through the Shaggy-sized hole in the wall. A swell of new aggravation rose in Shaggy and he forced it down into his wolf, feeling his body shift. His arms and legs elongated and his face stretched outward. He glimpsed the tiger bastard's shocked face, and he smiled. He could feel his teeth grow larger as he grew, and the beast within merged with his own mind. The two became one, and Shaggy glared across the street at the tiger, who was grinning again. Oh ho ho. So that's what they were talking about. Now you might be worth your price, little doggy. Shaggy growled as he already felt his body growing tired from holding this form. It wasn't anything dangerous yet, but he needed to hurry. With that in mind, Shaggy burst forth. His new speed launched him across the street and in front of the tiger in an instant. He feigned a swipe with his left claw while raising his leg for a kick. His wolf-shaped leg caught the tiger man in the chest and smacked him back into the dance hall. Shaggy delighted in watching the smug cat get batted away and gave chase. The tiger tore up the wooden floors even more as his body skidded to a stop. He righted himself just as Shaggy was back in his face. Shaggy jabbed his claws into the tiger's face, trying to end it. But the tiger moved, his arm coming up and catching Shaggy's jab. While Shaggy tried to wrench his arm free, the tiger man slammed two swift crosses into his abs. Shaggy grunted under the weight of the blows and stopped, trying to pull his arm free. Instead, Shaggy planted his grab the tiger man's waist with his free hand. With a mighty tug, Shaggy lifted the bastard up and started running. They both hit the south wall and crashed through it into an alley. The blow made the tiger let go of his arm and Shaggy backstepped out of range. The tiger did the same, but as he moved, he grabbed the nearest thing and threw it at Shaggy. A large green dumpster went flying in Shaggy's direction and he had to dodge back into the dance hall. The tiger pushed his advantage and followed, aiming a haymaker at Shaggy's head. Shaggy ducked and raked his claws against the tiger's stomach and chest. Running back into the alley, Shaggy spun in time to see the tiger man's trench coat and shirt fall in pieces. Red lines of blood trailed along the man's furry stomach. Flecks of green fire eating away at the skin. But the wound slowly healed, even the graying skin was quickly repaired. The tiger hissed as the wounds closed, and he glared at Shaggy. "Them things sting, you great big mutt. I guess those horns aren't just for show." Shaggy blinked. He didn't remember having horns before. Were those new? Where the hell had they come from? Shaggy briefly remembered getting a notification a while back when fighting Tone's old group. But he hadn't checked it yet. Could that have been it? While Shaggy was distracted, the sneaky cat pounced. Literally. The large tiger man slammed into Shaggy's chest, paws and feet, hitting Shaggy in the upper chest and thighs. The tiger's small black claws sank into Shaggy's chest and they both tumbled backward. Shaggy grabbed the man's wrists and tried to pry him off. But the claws were in deep and the tiger wasn't budging. So Shaggy launched himself forward for a body slam. He and the tiger hit the pavement. Shaggy put all of his weight into the slam and grinned as the tiger man groaned loudly. But then his opponent quickly rallied and Shaggy felt the tiger man's legs bury into his stomach. With an almighty heave, Shaggy was launched high into the air. Shaggy went sailing over the rooftop straight upward as the tiger got to his feet. He tried to roll, swim or anything to get out of the way, but he was in free fall. He watched the tiger pounce off one alley wall, then another as he leapt up toward the falling Shaggy. With the few seconds he had, Shaggy spotted the roof of the dance studio and activated Pounce. His body lurched in midair as the ability took hold and he went crashing into the roof. He heard the tiger give an annoyed yelp as he missed Shaggy by inches. Shaggy skidded to a stop on the roof even as his body cracked it in several places. Getting to his feet, Shaggy saw the tiger land on all fours and glare at him. He was about to launch himself back into the fight when a sudden wave of exhaustion hit him. Shaggy felt his body shrink and his newfound strength disappeared. The tiger froze as a naked Shaggy stood before him. Back in his human form. The tiger man's nose scrunched up in annoyance. "What are you doing? It was just getting good. Shift back." The tiger man roared. Shaggy panted as all his bones seemed to ache. "Howies, I can't just do that." The tiger man froze again as Shaggy tried to explain. Soon, a wide grin appeared on his face again, and he happily rubbed his paws together. "Oh. You're new to that form, aren't you? Okay. Then let's make it fair." Shaggy blinked at the Tiger Man's words until the large tiger humanoid shrank. His orange and black fur shrunk back into his skin. His paws and claws became human hands, and a head of long black hair grew from the tiger's head. Soon, the green eyes of the tiger became the green eyes of a tall, black-haired man. Clothes still mostly intact, the man gave Shaggy a spin and threw out the tail of his trench coat. "See, that's how the transformation is done," said the man's new, less growly, voice. "Now, I'm not as tired as you. But this should make it more fair, no?" Shaggy coughed as he stood there, naked and annoyed. "If you really want to make it fair, you can tell me who you work for." The Tiger Shifter paused and nodded slowly. "I suppose that would be fair and not like it matters. You're about to die, anyway." Shaggy gave a mental happy dance. Sure, it was most likely that the HLO had sent this little headhunter. But confirmation was always good. But then the man spoke again and Shaggy groaned. With that, the man launched himself at Shaggy. Unable to move, Shaggy was tackled to the rooftop as the man landed atop of him. The man slammed his fist into Shaggy's face as he weakly tried to fight back. His whole body was sore, but the pain in his face kind of lessened the overall pain. Shaggy felt the bones in his nose and cheek break and fix themselves multiple times as the shifter punched him over and over. He got some small satisfaction from watching the man's face twist in angry as Shaggy kept healing. The man roared as Shaggy gave a gurgling laugh. "Harka. You know, if I wanted a kiss I would've." Shaggy's snarky quip was cut off as the man slammed another fist into Shaggy's face. The man's knuckles were like iron as Shaggy felt the rooftop crack underneath him. An awful and petty idea struck Shaggy, and he started lifting his face into the man's punches. Each time he did, his head was slammed back into the rooftop, creating cracks that spread out along the roof. So enraged was his opponent that Shaggy didn't think the Tiger Shifter noticed. With his fleeting strength, Shaggy gripped the man's ankles and waited. Soon, the roof creaked ominously and the back of Shaggy's head stopped hitting anything. With a final punch, the Tiger Shifter roared at Shaggy. "Why won't you die?" Shaggy burbled nonsense up at his attacker. His teeth and jaw healing, but slowly. The man must have seen the slow healing because he started punching Shaggy again. Attacking like a wild animal, the man didn't notice the roof creaking get louder and louder. Shaggy's vision went black as he heard and felt the roof start to go. The Tiger Shifter must have noticed too, as Shaggy felt the man try to move. But Shaggy held on with whatever remaining strength he had. He felt his body go weightless and his vision blurred with images of falling debris and the surprised face of the Tiger Shifter. Shaggy was grinning even as his body turned into cubes of white light. The last thing he felt was Rita and his pack getting closer through his pack link. Shaggy blanched even as he was dying. He immediately sent them orders to run, but his vision was suddenly black and white. He didn't know if the message had gotten out, but he hoped his pack was smart enough not to tangle with the damn Tiger Shifter. Shaggy held no illusions that the bastard was dead. If Shaggy could survive a falling building, then so could that asshole. "You have died. No respawn/emergency point nearby. Initializing Deathville protocol." Shaggy swiped away the standard Deathville protocol and stared at the open sky. He was in the black and white version of the dance studio. Black clouds moved along a white sky as the rooftop debris was frozen mid-fall around him. He briefly wondered what kind of weird test Deathville was going to throw at him this time or if the Tiger Man was going to kidnap him. As Shaggy understood it, player death was handled weirdly by the NPCs. If the HLO or whoever had sent the Tiger Shifter wanted Shaggy captured, he would appear in jail. But if the game wanted him dead, then the game would make the NPCs think he had died. That way, when he popped up later, they would be surprised. Well, that was shitty. Shaggy heard his own voice say from beside him. Sitting up, Shaggy glanced around till he came face to face with his own face. Another Shaggy was sitting in the building debris, glaring at Shaggy. Shaggy frowned at him and crossed his arms over his naked chest. Shaggy took in his doppelganger appearance and frowned. The man looked just like him, but there was something off about him. Maybe it was in the shape of his face or the almost feral-looking eyes. The man reminded Shaggy of his father, and that instantly made him dislike the doppelganger. "We don't have time for your nonsense parental problems," said the feral Shaggy. "You and I need to talk." Shaggy spun on his ass and stared into his doppelganger's face. He glared at the obvious representation of his inner wolf. Why the game decided to show him this instead of the four-legged form was beyond him. But whatever, the wolf analog obviously had a lot to say. Shaggy smirked, sharp teeth visible. "You know why the game chose this form. Don't pretend you don't." "Yeah," Shaggy sighed. "So is this one of those come to an understanding with yourself things, or are we supposed to fight? It could probably go either way, really." "Fair." Shaggy nodded as he considered the trope in its entirety. It was pretty standard look within yourself nonsense. Although whether he had to conquer himself or merge with his inner wolf was another matter. He sighed again and stood to his feet, the doppelganger doing the same at the same time and in the same way. Shaggy grimaced as the Shaggy grinned. "It's part of the whole shebang. I have to do it," Shaggy said. Shaggy rolled his eyes and looked around. The half-broken studio was frozen around them. A pure white landscape was just beyond the walls. Shaggy moved over and tried to pass through the hole in the wall, but he was pushed back by an unseen force. Stumbling a bit, Shaggy caught himself and stood straight again. "So we're stuck in here." "Obviously." "Well, get on with it then." Shaggy grumbled. "Huh? You said you wanted to talk. So talk." "Thanks. Noticed. But don't you mean us? Aren't you like the game's representation of my inner wolf?" Shaggy waggled his head. "Kind of. I mean, in the death realm maybe. But that's only so you can have a proper talk/fight with me. So you came out just to say what we both already know? Way to go, Deathville. You're using a shitty trope badly. What's next? Is Tiger Guy gonna be my father? Seriously. Curb the daddy issues. We got real game problems. How are you going to take out that tiger?" Shaggy shook his head as he circled the trashed dance studio. "I don't know. Evolve? Get stronger? Hunt him down with the pack? Have Levy hold him in place while we shoot his ass with a bunch of green lasers?" Shaggy pulled a sour face. "All but the first two of those sound shitty. Do you really want to get help to take the asshole down? One-on-one didn't work. So why not? I get by with a little help from my friends, after all. It doesn't sit right with me. We should find the bastard's home turf and break his arms and legs. Then hang his torso from the HLO building's fence. You got anger issues. I'm literally you. Also, a representation of your inner wolf that may be a metaphor for your repressed anger and aggression." "Really? You're going to get psychological now? I thought you said we didn't have time for our daddy issues?" Shaggy shrugged. "It's what you've been assuming your inner wolf was, right?" Shaggy gave a sort of half nod. "Kind of. It's the easiest way for me to rationalize the thing. Otherwise I have a literally beast within me. Which is disconcerting. And may prove a few people right about you." "Wow. You really are going the psychologist route, huh? But, I'm sorry. This is a game. So I don't want my emotional baggage to weigh me down in here. This is supposed to be fun, after all." Fine, Shaggy sighed theatrically. "If that's the case, though, you know what we have to do." "Yeah. But we both knew it was going to come to this." Shaggy grinned and grew his claws. "You are such a simple creature." Shaggy growled, voice deepening. Shaggy spun to look at his doppelganger and found that the bastard had shifted into the man-wolf form. He started to swear, but the enormous beast was already upon him. Lanky furry arms ending in massive claws slashed at where Shaggy was. He ducked and jumped forward, claws out, slashing the side of his target. The giant werewolf spun and growled as Shaggy's claws left long, thin streams of blood. They both paused as the streams of blood flowed into the air and froze. They shared a confused look before the werewolf launched itself at Shaggy again. This time Shaggy wasn't fast enough, and he was lifted bodily as the werewolf's claws ripped into his stomach. The werewolf carried the impaled Shaggy across the room and slammed him into the far wall. Streams of blood filled the room as Shaggy's sides bled profusely. He slammed his own claws into the wild beast's head and shoulders, sending more and more reams of blood into the air. The two growled and roared at each other as their wounds opened and closed. Shaggy was delighted to find that he wasn't getting any hungrier in this realm, so his healing would never deplete or end. Of course, it was annoying that his doppelganger also appeared to be in the same situation. Shaggy twisted his claws into the werewolf's shoulder and felt himself fall to the floor. Finally released, he dove through the beast's legs, clawing his knees as he went. More and more streams of blood filled the air and Shaggy felt himself step into one. Cold blood splattered his arm and cheek. But he ignored it as the werewolf sent a kick at him. He backed away, stepping into more blood. The werewolf roared and pounced, arms out. Its black fur became matted with red blood as the two wrestled through the dance studio. Shaggy would claw streaks of blood from the werewolf's hide and the werewolf would do the same to Shaggy. Soon, the small area they were fighting was filled with rivulets of blood. Shaggy couldn't move without getting a splash of ice-cold blood on his body. But it was the same for his doppelganger. After an indeterminate amount of time, Shaggy backed away from the werewolf and felt his entire back soaked with frozen blood. He seized up from the feeling and the werewolf jumped at the opening. The beast slammed into Shaggy's chest, sending them both back into a sea of red. Cold blood soaked Shaggy to the bone, and he heard the wolf whine with the sensation. Shaggy waited for them both to slam into the floor. But the feeling never came. Instead, he floated in a sea of red blood. The werewolf's claws were still embedded in his shoulders. Shaggy yanked the claws out and went to swing his own into the werewolf. But he hit nothing but pools of blood. Did I win? Shaggy asked inside Shaggy's head. No. I think we both lost. Shaggy sighed as he floated on a sea of blood. Oh. So this is like a metaphor for what will happen if you keep attacking all of your problems like a crazed animal? Yes. Hey. That's kind of like what you're. Yeah. But you also know I'm an avatar created by game mechanics to unsettle you. So. Shaggy's question was met with silence as he continued to float through the sea of ice-cold blood. He shivered from the experience and tried to settle his thoughts. Thoughts of childhood stupidity worked their way into his brain, and he breathed an annoyed sigh. Steadying his breathing, Shaggy centered himself and let the old memories flow over him. He floated weightlessly through the cold sea, taking calming breaths and clearing his mind. Soon he felt the air warm up and a strange pressure sat on his arms and chest. He blinked and found himself in a dark world filled with ominous creaking and the sounds of skittering insects. A sudden onrush of pain in his body told him he was back in the game world. He wanted to slap the game's developers as he felt a sizable chunk of building was on top of him. Bastard Game had rezzed him back in the collapsed dance studio. What kind of sadistic game would do that? Boss, a woman's voice shouted, sounding muffled through the debris. He tried sending them a message through the pack link. But a wave of pain flared up in his brain and he was overcome with a sudden dizziness. Checking on his inner wolf, Shaggy saw the creature's space in shambles. The beast was lying on a cushion, idly licking its wounds. Shaggy saw that the thing was cut and bleeding from several long gashes on its body. The beast raised its head as Shaggy looked in on it and the two shared a look. Shaggy did his best not to see his own eyes reflected in the beast's, but he knew they were the same. He quickly pulled his vision away from the inner space of his mind and focused on the problem. His pack was looking for him and he was buried under building rubble again. With no way to contact his pack mentally, Shaggy smacked the large piece of rubble on top of him. His hand made a rough smack against the stone and he felt his nerve endings scream at him. Pain flared from his knuckles up to his shoulder. He grunted in pain as he realized his entire body was like a raw nerve. "Here," someone shouted. Shaggy sighed in relief as he heard footsteps and shuffling. Soon, the rubble above him was being roughly yanked away. He tried not to think about what would happen if a slab of concrete crushed his head and laid as still as possible. With a lot of shuffling and voices shouting different commands, the stones above him cleared away for Shaggy to see his pack. Surprisingly, every single one of them was there. Shaggy grinned and tried to say something witty. But all that came out was "ow." Shaggy tried for another witty remark. But again, all he could do was groan. "Rita, perhaps now isn't the time for 20 questions. We need to get him out of there." Sybil's voice said. "Right. Stanley, Seacrass? Do you mind? We still good, Vic?" "Yeah, we're still clear. How's the boss?" The way Shaggy was positioned under the rubble, the only ones he could see were Rita, Seacrass, and Stanley. The two strongest pack members were heaving large blocks off of Shaggy. A question rose in Shaggy's mind, but he couldn't convey it. Rita must have seen his face and guessed, 'cause she answered his unasked question. "Ephemera is following your friend." Shaggy blinked for a few seconds, and then almost ripped his shoulders out, trying to get out of the rubble. "Argh!" Shaggy screamed as every nerve ending in his body exploded. He was pretty sure he blacked out, as when he next opened his eyes, he was out of the rubble. Rita was glaring down at him and looked like she wanted to slap him. Seacrass and Stanley were standing guard over his body. Tom was nowhere to be seen now, and Shaggy tried to look around, but his neck wouldn't listen to him. Shaggy blinked as he let his eyes take in the open sky above him. It was dark and filled with stars. It had been all day before his pack got to him. He gave a sigh. Rita nodded slowly when she saw him understanding. She looked over her shoulder and Shaggy heard more rustling from nearby. Soon Tom came back into view, a plastic bag in his hands. "Got it." Tom grinned. "Great," Rita said. "Now feed the idiot so we can get out of here." "What about Sybil? She was supposed to get him clothes?" "I'm sure she's coming. But let's get the boss up, huh?" Tom sighed and moved over to Shaggy. "Sorry, boss. This is going to be awkward." Shaggy blinked, confusedly. Until Tom pried his jaw open, slowly. Shaggy groaned from the pain as Tom grabbed a squeeze bottle of red liquid and sent a jet of liquid into Shaggy's mouth. Shaggy tasted strawberry and almost spit the nasty liquid back out. But, needing to heal, he made himself swallow. His aches and pains slowly went away as Tom kept a steady stream of juice aimed at Shaggy. "Easy. Don't drown the idiot," Rita admonished. "Boss'll be fine," Tom said as he put the empty bottle down and grabbed another. Shaggy finished off 3 bottles of raspberry, strawberry, and some weird flavor he couldn't identify. Once the 3rd bottle was finished, he had enough strength to sit up and started shoving handfuls of food into his mouth. Tom had bought or stolen several burgers, random candies, and chips. Shaggy was gulping them down hurriedly as Sybil came back with clothes. The tags were still on the things, so Shaggy could guess how she had acquired them. Shaggy nodded as he tipped a bagful of chips into his mouth. He sent orders for Ephemera to come back. But all he got were sharp angry feelings, and what he was sure were the mental equivalent of swear words. Shaggy groaned. "Will one of you talk to Ephemera? She isn't listening to me, and she needs to get away from that tiger shifter. If he smells her, she's done." Rita reached over and smacked him in the head. "Boss. We know. We could smell the bastard all over the area. What possessed you to wander into his territory?" "I didn't." It was a trap. One I tried to avoid, but the dick caught me and hooped my ass. Shaggy put on the shirt and jeans Sybil had gotten him. A bright yellow symbol on the front of his shirt drew his eye, and he looked down. "I'm with stupid" was printed on the front of his shirt and the arrow was pointing straight up at his face. He gave the smirking Sybil a glare. "What?" "I think it is both appropriate, and it fits nicely." Shaggy stuffed a candy bar into his mouth as his pack mates all nodded in agreement. He even saw Stanley giving the short blonde woman a thumbs up. "Bunch of traitorous pack mates." He brushed the crumbs off his mouth and sighed. "Fine. Let's get back home." "Home?" Rita shouted. "Boss, you just got ragdolled. We need to strike back." Shaggy shook his head. "No. The dude tore through me when I was in my man-beast form. I don't want to risk any of you in a fight with him. He was literally a cat playing with its food before he finished me. I want every one of you to be able to shift before we even make the attempt." "What if he has his own pack?" Tom shouted. Rita sighed and rubbed her head. "Boss, he thinks you're dead. This is the best time to strike. What if he marches into our territory, anyway? He was a bounty hunter, Rita. He cares about being paid. Which he will be if he reports that I'm dead. So let's have our enemies think I'm dead while we strengthen our position in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, we do our best to get stronger. Like I said, I want all of you to achieve the werewolf form as soon as possible." Shaggy stared down at each of his pack until each nodded quietly. Some were easier than others. But once he had gotten looks of acceptance from Rita and Seacrass, Shaggy left the crumbled building. Vic was standing on the sidewalk by the collapsed building. The sharpshooter was smoking a cigarette and watching the street. He tipped his hat to Shaggy and shouldered his rifle. "Back home? I know you heard all that. You good with it?" "Yep. I want my wolf as much as the rest of them. But you can't fault them for wanting to stomp in the face of the guy that hurt ya, boss." "I don't, Vic. But we got to be smart about it. Numbers are good, but I want us tough on top of it. I ain't sacrificing any of you." Vic tossed his cigarette. "That's good to hear. Even so, I figured you'd rather fight your tiger than go home and explain all this to Levy. I mean, Ephemera is already going to give you an earful." Shaggy sighed as the others of his pack joined them on the street. He felt Ephemera fuming and returning slowly. He sent her orders to go back to the deli. She sent back a spike of annoyance, but confirmed the order. Shaking his head, Shaggy walked toward the north. His deli and his wife awaited, and he needed to formulate a plan to take out the tiger bastard. Sure, his inner wolf and the recent death veil had tried to dissuade him from the path of violence. But that had always been a problem for him in the real world. He didn't see that being any different in the game world. At least in the game, when he beat a guy to death, the consequences would be less severe. This is bullshit. No, it isn't. Now keep meditating. Can't I punch something? Or set something on fire? No, Sybil. We tried anger with you and it didn't work, remember? Seacrass wasn't angry, though. He just needed the adrenaline, right? Why not let us do that? Seacrass was fighting me and got super excited. His adrenaline spiked, and it triggered his shift. Each of you has already tried that. Now we're on this. Shaggy sighed as he explained for what felt like the 100th time. I get that, Sybil said, opening one of her closed eyes and glancing at Shaggy. But I feel like I was onto something for a second or two. Maybe if we try it again. Rita snorted as she smacked the blonde woman in the back of the head. Bullshit, SYB. We can all feel you lying. Now, do like the boss said and focus. You don't see Vic or Stanley complaining, do you? Vic's asleep and the kid is still glowing from being made a full werewolf. Neither of them is a good metric to judge by. But I bet Effie agrees with me, right? Sybil had both her eyes open now and was looking down the line of cross-legged pack members. Vic was listing slightly to the side while Stanley looked like he was trying to force mental calmness into his brain. Ephemera, however, hadn't budged since Shaggy had explained the exercise. But the intensity in his number one henchman was radiating so much it could almost be felt by all of them. Shoo. I'm trying to reach Lupin oneness with the universe or whatever. Ephemera whispered out of the corner of her mouth. Sybil slumped forward in her cross-legged position. Shaggy could feel the woman's aggravation through the link. While he had been putting his pack through their paces, he had been focusing on the link that connected them. It was an almost nebulous thing. But once he had enough time to focus in on it, it became almost tangible. The different feelings and emotions he could pick up from each one of them were astounding. Sybil cracked an eye again. What about Tom? Why isn't he doing this? Shaggy sighed and turned to look at the skinny man in question. Tom had been through the same exercises as the others. Except he claimed to have felt some connection with the aggression aspects of being a werewolf. The pack had felt no lie in his words. So they were letting him working himself into a rage nearby. Although it wasn't really going well. He was plenty annoyed by now. But it wasn't exactly a white-hot fury that would trigger a shift. At least not in Shaggy's opinion. Again, Sybil. You know why. We can all feel how close he is. Rita explained. Sybil groaned as she resumed her meditation position. I swear if that slimy bastard shifts before I do, y'all will never hear the end of it. We haven't heard the end of it yet, SYBS. Vic grumbled, surprising everyone. Shaggy zeroed in on the sharpshooter and studied his link with the man. Vic was at a serene calmness that Shaggy almost aspired to reach. The man was so mellow that he had fallen asleep. Shaggy assumed that meant Vic was probably not a confshifter or whatever the hell term they had for it. Vic, why don't you stand up and we'll try something else? Shaggy said. Oh, come on. Sybil groused, but another smack from Rita stopped any further complaints. Vic stood and lit a cigarette as he approached Shaggy. So what's next, boss? We've tried anger, calmness, annoyance, and ever other anger-based emotion. Do you want me to cry now? Shaggy huffed and shrugged his shoulders. I really don't know, Vic. Maybe? It's not really about the emotion itself. That's just the trigger. You hold on to that feeling and let it feed into your transformation. After the first few tries, the feeling sort of fades into the background and you get a sense of how to summon it at will. That's a decent way to put it. Rita agreed. Woof. Worsicrass barked as he came stomping over. Shaggy had the big lizard alien of their crew practicing his own shifting. He and Rita were taking it in turns to stay shifted as long as possible. Sort of like training a muscle. They had taken to running about the enormous cavern under the deli, helping the digging crew move dirt around. It was great practice, and it actually wore them out fairly quickly. So I just have to run the gamut of emotions across my mind until I hit something? Vic asked. Essentially. But the feelings have to be real. You can't just fake a feeling like joy and be done with it. The memory of genuine feelings works too, but takes a greater degree of concentration. No shit. Tom shouted from where he was standing. The lanky man was red in the face as he tried to work himself into a fury. Shaggy could feel the man's frustration seeping out over their link. Shaggy sent the man positive reinforcement over the link, but Tom practically recoiled from the feelings. That's not helping, boss. Tom hissed. Shaggy quirked an eyebrow, but he shrugged. Tom was right. Getting a head full of positive vibes probably didn't help. If anything, it probably made it more difficult. He turned back to work with Vic when Stanley spoke up, sounding confused. Could you amplify our own emotions doing that, Shaggy? I mean, boss? Shaggy froze and actually stopped to think of it. If he could send emotions down the pack link, why couldn't he overload the link with feelings? He wanted to slap himself. He turned back to Tom and gathered as much aggravation and angry as he could. but Rita and Sybil both shouted out at once. Not that much. Me first. Both women glanced at each other as Shaggy released the feelings. He looked between the two, waiting for an explanation. Although Sybil's complaint was obvious. Rita grimaced as she looked between Shaggy and Tom. Boss, that much emotion is liable to knock the dumbass out. Since when are you an expert on the link, Rita? Tom snapped. I can take it, boss. Hit me with everything you got. Shaggy glanced at Rita one last time. But the woman merely threw her hands in the air and waved him on. Shrugging, he gathered up his own feelings again. Focusing on rage and anger. With a mental shove, Shaggy jammed all his feelings down the link and at Tom. For a while after the attempt, nothing happened. But then Tom shuddered. Their little corner of the cave went quiet as they all watched Tom shake. The man's whole body seemed to vibrate visibly. His body bulged at odd angles, and Shaggy almost whooped in triumph. But then Tom screamed. A sudden psychic blast that carried physical weight slammed into all of them. Shaggy went sailing into the dirt as he heard the rest of his pack shout in alarm. With a roll, Shaggy got back to his feet in time for a splitting headache to roar across his mind. Shaggy felt like his brain was spilling from his ears and nose. But with a quick check, he found it was just blood. Sighing, he wiped it all away and walked back to his crew. The blast, whatever it was, had thrown him about 15 feet away. The others had been luckier. Most of them were merely bowled over. Sybil, Rita, and Ephemera gave him scathing glares as he approached, and even Seacrass was giving him a reproachful look. Vic was bemoaning a lost cigarette while Stanley gripped his head in pain. Tom was unconscious and sprawled across the ground. Blood pouring from his nose. Shaggy felt his pulse quicken with worry. But after a quick check, he found Tom was fine overall. Just knocked out. With a sigh, Shaggy stood and turned to inform the others. But the three women were still glaring at him. He gave them his best whoops look and hoped that would be the end of it. Rita and Ephemera snorted and looked away. But Sybil had a grin on her face. My turn, boss. She said. You cannot be serious. Shaggy grumbled. Hey. You just found out what not to do. Now it's time to start small and experiment. Let's do anger again. But this time like a small dose. We already know anger doesn't work with you, Sybil. What would be the point of trying that emotion? I don't know. Practice using the correct dose? Just give me a smidgen of something. Shaggy looked at Rita and Ephemera. But both women were still not engaging with the conversation. Vic looked intrigued and Stanley was just getting up from the ground. The boy's ears were silver. He probably used his quinnica to protect them. With another sigh, Shaggy sent a dose of joy through the link. It was a memory of joy from long ago. But the feeling still resonated strongly within the memory. So Shaggy hoped that would enhance the feeling somehow. Everyone waited as Sybil seemed to become extremely quiet. The distant sound of mages, lackeys, and bots working filtered over to them. But they all ignored it as Sybil's face lit up with a smile. The normally grouchy blonde woman was grinning at Shaggy. But the smile quickly faded as she seemed to come back to herself. Well, that wasn't unpleasant. But not the right feeling, boss. At least I don't think so. Shaggy nodded and quickly thought of another emotion. This time, he went with sadness. A distinct and heart-wrenching memory came bubbling to the surface of Shaggy's mind. But he immediately stomped it down. Instead, he went with another memory from his childhood. One tied to losing a competition and feeling like a failure. He bundled the feeling up and sent it down the link. They all watched as the feeling seemed to slap Sybil in the face. Her hazel eyes fell, and she almost looked ready to cry. Shaggy momentarily thought he had gone too hard with the memory. But Sybil quickly snapped back and glared at him. She quickly wiped her eyes and groaned. Arg! Don't do that again, and no. That's not the right emotion. Shaggy nodded dumbly as he took stock of what they had tried. Anger was way out. Calm hadn't worked either. Happy and sad were also either too broad or just not right. He thought about trying fear next. But with the look Sybil gave him, Shaggy decided to go for something else. He searched his memories for any significant feelings. Sorrow and rage filled a lot of his mind. But there was also joy and pride, too. Some memories had to be shoved back down into the dark pit of his brain again. But while he was mentally punting a particularly annoying memory into the void, something else came to mind. It was actually another memory tied to competition. Except this one was of him winning and the feeling of dominating an opponent. How empowered he felt at that moment. The rush, the cheers, the looks on his. Shaggy stopped the memory there and focused on the feeling. It was a complex one. Happiness and exhaustion pulsed through it. But at its core was a feeling of being able to do anything, that feeling of conquering anything that got in his way. With as much feeling as he could muster, Shaggy sent the emotion down the link. It hit Sybil with almost physical weight. Shaggy was surprised to find the pack link almost pulse back at him as he checked on Sybil's emotional state. An echo appeared over the link and Shaggy saw Sybil almost rush off and try to chase the echo. Instead, she mastered herself and seemed to dig her feet into the dirt. After some time, the blonde woman came back to herself. Blinking rapidly, she turned to Shaggy and smiled. "That's it, boss, I know it. It wasn't strong enough, though. You got another one?" Shaggy searched his memory, but that feeling of dominating another was scarce in his mind. He had been fairly young, and the feeling quickly was usurped by feeling so joy and the rush of winning. Sybil seemed to read his mind, as she nodded quickly. "Looks like not. That's fine. I think I can chase down the feeling. At least now I have a direction to run in." "Thanks, boss." Shaggy nodded and raised a hand as Sybil rushed past him. She slapped his open hand and cackled as she almost physically chased the emotion. Shaggy heaved an enormous sigh as he collected himself. Finding the right feeling was actually pretty draining. It was like giving himself emotional whiplash as he dove between feelings. Sure, the emotions were muted in memory, but reliving some of them was taxing. Shaggy stretched his arms over his head as a soft cough came from in front of him. Ahem. Looking up, Shaggy spotted Ephemera, Stanley, and Vic all looking at him. Each with an eager look on their face. He groaned. Rita walked over and patted his shoulder a few times in commiseration. But then the red-head swordswoman shifted into her werewolf form and ran off with Seacrass. "Traitor!" Shaggy shouted as he watched the brunette and green wolves run off. "Don't worry, boss." Ephemera grinned as Shaggy turned back toward them. "We promise to be gentle." "Ha ha." Shaggy deadpanned. "Just for that, Stanley is going first." Ephemera got a dangerous look in her eye. But when Shaggy didn't budge, she turned it on the taller teen. Stanley sputtered under the weight of the shorter woman's glare. I can go last. That would be fine with me, actually." "Boss, you should do Effie first." "Oh yes, please." "Effie. Stop. Please." Shaggy rubbed his eyes as he searched his memories again. He found himself hoping that an emergency would happen topside as Vic, Stanley, and Ephemera crowded around him. He locked in a particular memory and got ready to send it through the link. It was going to be an extremely draining exercise. Shaggy stared down at the prone form of Levy. Her body twisted and spun in the dirt, and Shaggy could only sigh. He somehow knew this was going to happen. It was just his luck, really. Levy kicked her feet into the air and clutched her stomach as she feebly tried to suck in air. Her face was red and tears streaked her cheeks as she rolled around. Rubbing his temples, Shaggy tried to put a stop to it. "It's not that funny," he said, dryly. "Ha ha 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 ha, it ha 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 really ha 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 is," Levy panted out as she fell into another long burst of laughter. Shaggy looked to his pack for help. But they were all deep in concentration. Ephemera, pink in the face, was sitting in the lotus position, trying hard to ignore them. Once Shaggy had gotten the hang of sending emotions through the link, the next few steps were up to them. He could point at the emotions they needed, but it was up to them to access them. Occasionally he'd send a bit of the emotion down the line to Sybil, Vic, or Stanley. Ephemera, however, was trickery. Ha 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 ha. I mean, what the hell? Haha. The game really is signaling something here, isn't it? Levy wiped tears from her eyes as she tried to sit up. Shaggy offered his wife a hand up. She took it, still cackling the whole way. Once she was back on her feet, she shot a glance at Ephemera and put a hand to her mouth. Shaggy groaned as his wife was almost incapacitated with laughter again. She had walked over while they were experimenting, which meant she got to see and hear about Ephemera's trigger emotion. Trying to distract his wife, Shaggy asked, "So, what did you want? You were overseeing the construction down here, right? Oh, you are not wriggling out of this. Your precious second-in-command NPC needs your help, Shaggy. Go on. Feed her the emotion she needs." Levy grinned. Shaggy studied his wife's face, looking for any duplicity. But all he saw was genuine delight at the situation. "Do we need to talk?" Levy's face was still smiling, but she raised an eyebrow as she looked between Shaggy and Ephemera. "Maybe." Shaggy blinked and tried to process that. But Levy smacked him on the shoulder. "Not right now. Now I want to see what happens when you send feelings of lust down your little link thing." Shaggy saw Ephemera shudder. Whether in dread or anticipation, he didn't know. Keeping his gaze firmly on his wife, Shaggy focused on a quick, but powerful, memory. He pulled out the feelings of lust and sent them down the link. He didn't watch the effect, but judging by the sly grin on Levy's face, it was something to see. Levy turned her gaze back to him and Shaggy could see the curiosity behind those eyes. "Yeah, we definitely need to talk," Levy muttered before a shout of elation interrupted them. Shaggy spun, briefly taken in Ephemera's pink-cheeked face, before he caught sight of Stanley. The young teen had leapt to his feet, hands in front of him. He was panting hard as his body shifted and morphed slowly. Vic and the others gave the boy room as his body bulged and then caved into itself. Shaggy heard Sybil cursing to herself as Stanley's shift sped up and ended abruptly. Now, standing where Stanley had been, was a sleek-looking, shiny, silver wolf. Shaggy blinked as he took in the creature's deep black eyes. Stanley was shaking his massive head as he got used to the new sensations. His skin was practically smooth, silver-armored. It reminded Shaggy of the boy's Quinnica parasite. With that thought, Shaggy quickly scanned the boy for any obvious weak spot, but he didn't have one. He blew out a breath in relief. "Damn, kid. Not bad," Vic said as he walked around the enormous wolf. Stanley was sleek and thin, where Seacrest was huge. He was also slightly taller than Rita's wolf. Shaggy could feel sheer curiosity filling the boy's wolfish form. He wanted to run and discover what he could achieve. He wanted to know what the Quinnica brought to his new form, and he wondered how he would stack up against Seacrest now. The lizard's big scaly wolf bumped shoulders with Stanley's sliver one. They both batted at each other for a bit before they started running through the cavern. The place was still growing, but Shaggy worried the two would damage something. Rita sent him some images of her watching over the two as her own wolf trotted after the playful pair. Turning back to Sybil and Vic, Shaggy saw them both deep in concentration. They were both trying to follow their own emotions to the core of their wolves. They both had odd triggers for some reason. Sybil's was based around domination, wanting to be the best and then flaunting it. But Vic's was based on some form of sadness, which was a weird thing for Shaggy to get a handle on. It wasn't a deep, lasting sadness, like sorrow, but it was related to the emotion in some way. The sharpshooter was running through every feeling he could get, trying to narrow it down. Meanwhile, Sybil was trying to bask in the feeling of domination. "Can't you help them a bit as well?" Levy asked, nodding at the two. With Vic, I don't even know the right emotion and I don't have the proper emotional memories to help Sybil. So, is that what you're transferring to each of them? Memories? Levy asked with a pointed look at Ephemera. Shaggy coughed awkwardly and didn't answer. Instead, he turned his mind inward and searched for something to help. But all he could pull up in his mind were images of victories and failures, happiness and sadness, loneliness and comfort. He searched and searched, but his mind was hazy with the effort. Eventually, he shook it off and glanced around. Ephemera, Vic and Sybil were still working on it. Tom was still unconscious on the ground and the rest of his pack was off helping the dig. Levy gave him a grin and a wink when he returned his gaze to her. He smiled back and pointed up at the ceiling of the cave. Want to go see how Frank's doing with the deli? Weren't you supposed to be in hiding after getting your ass kicked? Yes, but I figure going into our defunct deli won't hurt. I've helped as much as I can here. At this point, I am probably more of a distraction than a help. Ah, you don't want to shove any more memories into Effie? Shaggy sighed at his wife and spun. She cackled behind him as she rushed to join him. Shaggy sent his pack orders to keep watch on the entrance. But there were already some lackeys there. Kexar's weapons and armor really gave his people a proper look. They appeared ready to go to war. Shaggy smiled at the two aliens guarding the entrance/exit to their cave and hurried down the tunnel. Levy by his side. The entire trip, Shaggy waited for Levy to have the conversation she apparently wanted to have. But she kept silent the entire way up to the deli. Which told Shaggy she probably wanted to have the conversation in the real world. Respecting that, Shaggy kept silent and walked up the stairs into the deli. The sounds of power tools and men shouting filled the air as they entered the kitchen area. Franklin was standing there talking things over with a few workers. But when he spotted them, he waved them over. Shaggy smiled back at Mr. Stein and looked around. Everywhere bits of the building were broken down as new teams of workers moved in and tried to set things up. With the arrival of Frank and his truck, Shaggy could implement some of the terminal's features. Such as building things quicker for a certain amount of credits. They could also now buy things through the terminal, but they'd have to wait for delivery. Although Shaggy suspected that they'd have the same issues they had with their builders. Frank had called every news outlet he could anonymously. But Shaggy wasn't sure of the impact they would have. All he could do was sit back and hope. The HLO was doing its best to isolate and buy out the area. Going by how desolate the place was, Shaggy could see they were succeeding. Levy tapped his arm and pointed to the front. Why do we want tables and chairs? We're a deli, right? Yeah, ostensibly. But I was also thinking of adding like a sandwich counter or something. That way, we have an excuse for our people to be loitering around. Shaggy grinned, happy at his idea. Oh, that is a good idea. Maybe we can even do an outdoor coffee area? Get that crowd in here. You know how people love their overpriced, terrible coffee. Shaggy thought about it for a few seconds before he shook his head. Maybe not. Sandwiches is already a stretch and I don't really want too many people hanging around. We still have to decide on an illegal business to set up in the back of the shop. Do we have the space? We don't, but it's an option on the terminal. We just pick the racket and we can build it out. But this is going to be our first one, so it has to be special. Casino? But isn't that played out? Sure, but that's for a reason. They are great at laundering and earning cash. People expect to lose money at a casino. So long as we add a couple of ringers that work for us, people will think they have a chance. Devious. Shaggy grinned. It's why you love me. Also, what if I build my coffee shop next door and we combine the backrooms? That way, we will have twice the space for our little casino. Lovely idea, my love. Shall we get to spending? Levy smiled as Franklin finally got a word in. Boss. I just want to thank you again for the opportunity. Thanks to Frank, we can get the place built out. We still have supply issues, though. Shaggy looked at Franklin's hopeful face as they moved toward the manager's office. He sighed. Good point. We still need meat and sandwich stuff, right? Actually, I have an idea about that. The local bodegas and shops that are still in the area have their own hookups for groceries. We could send some people out to figure out where they get their stuff. Then we can decide how extra legal we want to get with acquiring it. Legal, Franklin. We need everything associated with the deli to be perfectly legal. Did you get all the paperwork settled? Franklin nodded. Almost. There are still a few things under review, but I don't foresee a problem. Good, then get your boys to make overtures to the shop owners in the area. Find their suppliers and we'll take it from there. What if they won't tell us? Some of them are hugely territorial. Then we nuke them, right? Levy asked excitedly. Shaggy sighed. No. Then we hit up Nuke and see what she says. Remember, my bloodthirsty wife, we are legitimate business owners. I'm about to sell overpriced coffee to posers. There's nothing legitimate about that. Levy snarked. Shaggy nodded idly in agreement as he started pouring through the terminal interface. He shared it with Levy. Franklin rushed off to grab some lackeys. So Shaggy and Levy tabbed through the various menus, ordering and shifting the floor plan of the deli around. Shaggy built out space underground for their upcoming casino. The interface made the whole thing fairly simple. But the credit expenditures were getting expensive. Also, the deli's terminal wouldn't let them build outside the deli. So Levy was going to have to go next door and do the renovations herself until she got a terminal to appear. Oh, that will be fun. Levy shouted excitedly. I'll be able to build out my store and then we can connect them beneath the ground. Shaggy blinked at the fairly suggestive tone in his wife's voice. When he glanced at her, she grinned and stuck her tongue out at him playfully. Got to keep you on your toes, love. You got a lust wolf downstairs after all. Shaggy tried to speak up, but Levy put up a hand. Later, darling. I'm going to grab a few lackeys and check the surrounding buildings. Shaggy sighed and waved to her as she walked out of the room. With a few more button presses, Shaggy completed the build of their underground casino. For now, it was just the space. They would have to acquire the furniture and tables extra legally, as Franklin had put it. Shaggy inhaled deeply, getting the sense of sweating men, sawdust, and overworked power tools. Looking out the large front windows of the deli, Shaggy saw that night was truly upon them. Maybe if all the pack gets their wolves, we can go for a run at night. That should be safe and we can run off some energy. I don't want to be cooped up at all hours of the day. Shaggy smiled as he thought about his pack running 7 strong through the dark streets of Austin. They were sure to freak out more than a few pedestrians. Maybe they could scare up some of the white-armored bastards too. His inner wolf perked up at the thought and that clenched it for Shaggy. He was supposed to be in hiding right now. But when the metaphysical wolf within you wants to go for a run, it's best to let the beast run, right? Shaggy prowled through the dark streets. His dark fur and the flickering street lights made his passage through the streets go unnoticed. But he found it odd that the neighborhood had become more alive as the sun went down. Not that it was a good thing. Laser fire lit up the night, shouts in the distance echoed off the brick buildings, and the smell of gunpowder was in the air. Already Shaggy and his pack had run into several small gangs, terrorizing all-night businesses. They had even stopped several home invasions in the 2 hours they had been patrolling. It makes sense, boss. Rita thought at him. Yeah. If the HLO is behind this, they've probably paid off a few gangs to stir up more trouble. Ephemera remarked in his head. The telepathic communication was an interesting addition to the pack's skill set. It had only appeared once every one of them had shifted. But it wasn't like communicating with words. It was more based on feeling and grainy mental images. But it helped Shaggy to think of the combined feelings as words. I've stopped another mugging. Stanley almost shouted. A wave of joy and images of dead muggers filled Shaggy's mind. The others of the pack sent the youngest member mental applause and pats on the back. Tom also informed them of stopping a breaking and entering attempt. The streets really were alive with crime at the moment. There wasn't a drone in the sky though, or any sirens. Shaggy shook his head. How sad is it that criminals have to police a neighborhood? Par for the course in this neighborhood, boss. But who cares? It makes us look good. Did you check in with your friend, Shags? Shaggy snorted and gave a nod. Even though most of his pack were roaming the neighborhood on their own. Sybil's black wolf beside him, though, saw the gesture. She gave a chuffing laugh and the green tips of her black fur shifted in the low light. Dumbass just nodded again. Boss. You have to get used to talking in your head. Sybil chortled as Shaggy got images of himself nodding. Shut up. It was a reflex, and yes, we swung by Nuke's shop. But it was closed and barricaded. Smart hybrid. Indeed. Now, has anyone spotted any actual HLO troopers? A chorus of no's answered Shaggy, and he gave a massive sigh. It seemed by day the HLO patrolled the neighborhood and at night, their criminals hit the streets. Which the HLO cleaned up in the morning. It was a tight system, and one designed to make the HLO look good. Shaggy wondered if Mr. White planned to unveil the troops at some point. Thanks to our elite team, this neighborhood has been cleared of any malefactors. Boss, please watch your stray thoughts. I'm still getting a few, Vic groaned. The HLO are the type of assholes to say malefactors, though. I mean just say bad guys, sheesh. Or criminals. How about the legally challenged? Shaggy tuned out his pack as he bolted past a flickering street light. He and Sybil hadn't come across much in the way of pedestrians. But he thought it best to keep their activities as hidden as possible. Something his pack seemed uniquely suited for, strangely. Sure, Vic and Rita were pretty much normal large wolves with brown fur. But Sybil, Tom, Stanley, and Ephemera all seemed geared toward stealth. Shaggy had been concerned about Stanley's silver-chromed body. But the giant wolf's silver body seemed to reflect the darkness, making his sleek form even harder to see. Tom and Ephemera, meanwhile, were specifically geared toward stealth. They were both black wolves, but their inherent powers made them tough to spot. Tom's wolf could almost fade into the dark and then you'd somehow forget the skinny bastard was there. It was unnerving. But it was nothing when compared to Ephemera. Ah, gee. Thanks, boss. I am pretty special. But I've got movement. It looks like troopers. Shaggy and Sybil froze on the sidewalk as they absorbed Ephemera's images. She had sent several street signs and landmarks to help them find her. Shaggy sent the all-call to the rest of the pack, but most of them were already moving. Rita and Tom moved in from the north, as Stanley and Seacrass curved in from the east. Shaggy and Sybil came up from the south and they all converged on an old parking lot. It sat in front of a large, gray, boarded-up supermarket. Up here. Ephemera sent down the link as he and Sybil paused across the street. She sent them multiple images of two groups meeting on top of the defunct supermarket. Once was clearly the HLO troopers. Their white armor standing out in the darkness. The second group on the roof was a bunch of aliens and humans. Some were waving guns around, others had pipes and swords. But the mass of people didn't look too pleased with the HLO. There were only 10 HLO troopers against the 30 in the mob. But Shaggy figured that the troops could handle the mob long enough to teleport away. Not all of us can go invisible, Effie. Sybil complained. How do you expect us to get up there? She and Shaggy had taken refuge behind some buildings on the north side of the supermarket. Rita and the others had joined them as they watched the scene through Ephemera's eyes. She was somehow perched on the roof and completely unseen by both parties. In his mind's eyes, Shaggy was staring at the back of the HLO troopers. The two sides seemed to be in a heated argument. But Shaggy couldn't hear what was being said. The gang members aren't happy with the HLO arrangement anymore. They are trying to back away from the deal. The troop leader is being oddly cooperative, saying that all the arrested parties will be allowed back on the streets once the HLO's business is done. But the thugs ain't buying it. Ephemera reported. Stanley and Tom, get as close as you can to the building. You are both the stealthiest. Once shit goes sideways, we hit the troops fast and hard. Hey. I'm stealthy too. Sybil argued, affronted. Shaggy blinked at the slim black wolf. Her dark fur made her hard to spot, but then there were the odd flickers of her green-tipped ends of her fur. They occasionally made her whole body light up under the street lamps. One second she was a dark wolf of the night and the next she was a greenfire hellhound. She even had horns like Shaggy had. Although not as big. Shaggy simply sent her an image of how she looked. She grumbled for a bit, but her wolf nodded solemnly. Stanley and Tom prowled around their block of buildings and crept toward the supermarket. Ephemera kept up a constant dialogue about what was going on. But Shaggy put it to the back of his mind as he took in their future battlefield. The roof was wide and large, but he didn't think it was going to survive multiple werewolves jumping on it. He was trying to come up with a solution when the first shot was fired. Surprisingly, it had come from another building entirely. A stream of green shot through the night and slammed into the head HLO trooper. His armor ate the blow, and he recovered. But from there on it was bedlam. The gangsters opened fire, and the HLO troopers defended themselves. Not waiting for them to initiate their teleports, Shaggy gave the order to attack, adding his thoughts about the structural integrity of the roof. Ephemera's response to this was to sweep across the rooftop. Bowling any HLO trooper she hit off the side. As her black form raced off the western side of the roof, Stanley and Tom leapt on the roof and snapped at the troops and fell back to the ground. Shaggy and the rest leapt from their hiding place and charged. Shaggy's mind was filled with his packmates, viewpoints, and surface thoughts. He suggested his own and watched as his pack moved with his will. He envisioned his pack making hit-and-run attacks across the roof. Then he got to watch as his plans were carried out. Effie, Stanley, and Tom started crisscrossing the rooftop, snapping up the HLO troopers and vanishing off the side of the roof. Rita, Sybil, and Seacrass were rushing to do the same. But Shaggy had other plans for himself. As he crossed the open parking lot, he leapt into the air. Aiming his body to come down on the HLO's location, Shaggy shoved all of his emotions down into his wolf. He slashed the beast, ate it all up as he soared through the air, body twisting as it transformed again. He and his inner wolf were merged even closer together as his 7-foot form slammed into the roof and ominous cracking sounds filled the air. Shaggy ignored the cracking, the shouts of alarm as he focused on the nearest trooper. Surprisingly, his target got his gun up and around with super speed. But Shaggy was just a bit faster. His shoulder took a blast of laser fire as the trooper pulled the trigger, but Shaggy's long claws swept through the trooper's chest and torso with ease. The man screamed as he fell into 2 parts, but Shaggy was already on his next target. Seacrass and Sybil's wolves swept across the large roof, snapping at the troops as they fired in all directions. Shaggy's slight form went overlooked until it was too late. Once Shaggy was upon them, the troopers fell into disarray. The enhanced speed and muscle from the man-beast form allowed him to make quick work of the remaining troopers. He glared down at the chopped-up bodies, panting harshly as he felt the shift about to slip through his fingers. Off the sides of the building, he could hear the crunching of bone and metal. In his mind, the pack had fallen into some kind of feral state and they were currently enjoying their kills. His mind jumped off that train of thought as a bullet pinged off his hairy shoulder. Shaggy turned to see the swarm of gangsters glaring at him wide-eyed. A smoking pistol was in the hands of one guy in the front. Shaggy snorted as he stretched his back, fighting the urge to shift to his human form. He wanted this group's full attention. The group's eyes grew wider as he spoke. As one, they seemed to pull away from Shaggy. He snorted again and was about to speak again. But a red laser slammed into his chest and singed his chest hair. Shaggy blinked, annoyed. With a thought, he sent Stanley and Tom after the shooter. "Call off your shooter before they get killed," Shaggy ordered the group of scared gangsters. The group glanced at one another. A few were shaking their heads violently. A tough-looking, bald-headed alien was shoved forward. He bowed awkwardly before he said, That's not our shooter, Mr. Wolf, sir." Shaggy raised an eyebrow. "Alive," Shaggy sent to his pack mates. There was some general annoyance sent back down the pack link. But he ignored it as his body tried to shift back to human. He jerked violently forward as he fought off the impulse. Another bullet hit his stomach and suddenly he was fine again. The man-beast form was solid and ready for action. Shaggy blinked as the sensation fighting him stopped. Another shot rang out and a bullet hit Shaggy in the cheek. He growled angrily as Ephemera and Rita leapt silently onto the roof. Shaggy briefly worried about the roof's stability, but it seemed to hold. "Next idiot that shoots me is getting ripped apart and feed to my pack," Shaggy growled. "Ugh. Boss, don't remind me. I just a guy." Rita groaned. "It's not that bad, actually," Seacrest responded, an odd chewing heard under his mental voice. "It's not. Kinda like chicken." "Hey. This one is spicy," Sybil said. The same chewing noises present in her voice. Shaggy blinked away the mental image of two of his pack members still eating. In front of him, the gang members were rapidly throwing their weapons to the floor. Once there was a fairly big pile of guns and melee weapons, the group turned back to Shaggy. He grimaced as the will to shift back to human reasserted itself. This time it was back with a vengeance. He did his best to keep it at bay, but soon he found his muscles and bones shrinking down. Panting, Shaggy came out of his forced shift and looked at the sea of blank faces staring at him. A few people went for their weapons again, but growls from Ephemera and Rita made them pause. The bald-headed alien blinked as he stared across at Shaggy. He opened his mouth to say something, but a voice from the crowd interrupted him. "Hey, that's just a little guy." Several of the thugs grinned and Shaggy groaned as he grew out a claw. Scratching the side of his face idly, he said, "All right, bring that idiot forward. He's the first to be sacrificed." The crowd pulled back again, and the alien leader barked out a laugh. Ephemera stepped forward to fulfill Shaggy's orders. But Rita quickly put her body between Effie and the crowd. Clearly understanding that Shaggy was joking. "I know you, don't I?" said the alien leader. Shaggy shrugged, ignoring the soreness in his muscles. "Maybe. I am pretty famous." "Uh-huh. What did you mean, your neighborhood?" Shaggy sighed and settled in to explain when another wolf jumped onto the roof. This time, the building creaked dangerously. Rita threw herself off the back of the roof. By the sounds of barking and whines, she clearly landed on Seacrest and Sybil. But he ignored that as Stanley dumped a slim body from his jaws. They were covered in saliva, but seemed otherwise okay. Their large black hoodie covered most of their torso, and they remained unmoving. Even as Shaggy's senses told him they were alive. The body stayed still for a few seconds. Although Shaggy was sure he saw the person shifting. With a sudden roll, the shooter got some distance and hopped to their feet. A black energy revolver in one hand and a slim display tablet in the other. Shaggy didn't have enough time to process the tablet though, as the 20-something man shouted. "I am Derek Perez, junior detective with the APD. You are all under arrest. Lie on the ground with your hands behind your head." Shaggy blinked and looked across at the other group of gangsters. Baldy stared back at him. With an almost practiced synchronicity, the entire roof burst out laughing. Even the wolves held their mirth to the sky as the detective looked on with annoyance and maybe a little dread. "What the hell is a junior detective?" Shaggy asked, looking around. Ephemera and Stanley twisted their lupin heads in confusion. The mob of gangsters and thugs shook their heads and rumbled incoherently. Shaggy stared back at the young, dark-haired Derek and grinned. The young detective gulped noticeably, and a sour smell filled Shaggy's nostrils. It was coming off the young man in droves. Derek swept his large pistols around the roof, keeping all of them in front of him. The bald-headed leader of the mob of thugs snorted and stomped toward the shivering detective. "I've got this little peckerwood," the alien growled. Derek switched targets to the bald alien. "Stay where you are. My backup is on its way. You are all under arrest." "Yeah, you said that," Shaggy snickered. "But what's the charge, exactly?" "Huh?" Derek asked, caught off guard. He kept backing away from the bald alien as he tried to get a look at Shaggy. "Well, I mean, you were meeting with mysterious people in the middle of the night and you killed them. So, murder." "Yeah, you're charged with murder in the first degree. So surrender now." Shaggy moved forward and gripped the bald alien's shoulder. With a harsh tug, he flung the alien back to his cronies and glared the young detective in the eyes. The younger man kept his gaze for a few quick seconds and then glanced away, his gun barrel dropping a few centimeters. Shaggy snorted and turned back to the group of thugs. Stanley and Ephemera had stomped toward the crowd, heads low, and teeth bared. Over the sides of the building, the scuffling of the rest of Shaggy's pack could be heard. He had them all stand down as he stared across at the leader of the mob. Shaggy snorted again. "You know, or at least have an idea." "I haven't seen any proof." His own growl was joined by the rest of his pack. 7 enormous wolves, all growling at once, were enough to spook the pack of idiots. Baldy kept glaring, but he was hustled off toward the edge of the roof. The group left their weapons where they threw them and hurried away as Shaggy's pack kept watch. Once the group was in the parking lot, Shaggy sent a message to Ephemera. Her dark-furred wolf yipped happily and vanished. Derek gasped in alarm, but Shaggy ignored him as he had his pack set up a perimeter. Rita sent him some pretty strong negative emotions. But Shaggy assured her he would be fine with the young Mr. Perez. The young detective in question was still trying to find the disappearing werewolf. But Shaggy caught his attention and smiled. "So, Mr. Perez. Do you want to tell me what you were really doing out here? Taking pot shots at heavily armored soldiers?" I told you." "Yeah. I got your lie. But how about the truth? You don't exactly smell like the police, if you know what I mean." Shaggy tapped his nose, and Derek stammered a bit. The detective eventually calmed himself enough to explain. I am part of the neighborhood watch, or what's left of it." Shaggy stared down at the hand cannon the kid was still holding up. "Pretty well armed for the neighborhood watch, son. Have you seen this neighborhood?" "Yes. Yes, I have. But what I really want to know is where you got the weapons. I can see your pistol, but you had to have had a rifle, right? That silver wolf of yours left it behind when they snapped me up." "I thought I was a goner," Derek said, finally lowering his gun. "Still, high-grade laser weaponry isn't exactly street legal, you know? This is Texas. There's a separate set of rules." Shaggy smirked and nodded. "Okay, so you are the heavily armed neighborhood watch. What's with the sniper fire? I've noticed these armored assholes prowling around. The cops aren't doing a damn thing. Meanwhile, the gangs are getting more and more brave. Someone has to do something. So you what? Decided to deputize yourself and go out and right the neighborhood's wrongs? That's vigilantism. I hear they throw you in jail for that." "I just wanted to know what they were up to." Derek sighed. He holstered his pistol and brushed ahead through his dark hair. "I saw Yig-Yag talking to that armored feller and lost my cool. Yig and his group of bastards have been harassing my apartment complex for the past couple of days. I figured the armored guys were the ones egging his crew on." Shaggy nodded sagely. He walked to the edge of the supermarket roof and sat down. "Well, junior detective, you ain't far off. I expect that the white armored gentlemen work for certain interested parties. Parties that want the HLO to get a hold of this neighborhood. So they come in, rile up the local street toughs, and run off all you hardworking citizens. Derek stared at Shaggy, a serious look smeared across his face. Do you have proof? Shaggy raised his hands helplessly. Not really. Every time we cap one of the armored guys, they teleport back to their owners. We hit them where we can, but it's a struggle. What's your stake in all this? Why are you out here killing the armored guys? I am just a business owner protecting my investments. I have a deli that is trying to get off the ground. But apparently, getting any businesses started around here is like pulling teeth from a shark. A business owner, huh? Well, a silent partner, as it were. Shaggy grinned. You don't look like a business owner. You look like a vagrant. Shaggy glanced down at his shirtless, shoeless body. Thankfully, his pants had survived the man-beast shift. But he was still having difficulty with the rest of his clothes. He grinned up at Derek and shrugged again. What can I say? Shifting is a costly endeavor. At least for now, all it costs is my shirt. Wait, Derek said, eyes going wide. You were that giant beast thing? Shaggy waved. Hi, I'm Shaggy. Your friendly neighborhood werewolf. Here to revitalize the economy and kick the HLO to the curb. Derek moved toward the edge of the roof and stared out at the parking lot. Shaggy's pack was shuffling and horsing around in the dark. A street lamp would occasionally catch one of the wolves, mainly Rita or Ephemera, doing their job. They patrolled the streets around the supermarket as Shaggy had his conversation. So they are all werewolves? Yes. My pack and I have chosen to move into this area. We didn't know that the HLO had designs of their own on it. So why don't you just move on? Find a new spot. Shaggy blew out a dramatic sigh. Well, see, my people have already started to set up here. Moving our operation to a different neighborhood wouldn't be very cost-effective. Derek raised an eyebrow at his words. Operation? Yes. We have many businesses we are interested in setting up here. Why, I bet this supermarket could use a little TLC. All it would take is an infusion of some credits and help in finding the right suppliers. Derek seemed to think over his words. While he did, the detective's eyes scanned around the dark streets. In the distance, the power in several buildings flickered dangerously. The neighborhood was clearly on its last legs. People were moving out, and the gangs were moving in. Shaggy could see the turmoil in the younger man's eyes. He clearly wanted to help his community. Even to the extent that he was trying to kill people in the middle of the night. How do I know you're not exactly like those white-armored guys? You say they are HLO, but I haven't seen any proof and, honestly, you strike me as more of a criminal than them. Shaggy saw Derek's hand drift back down to his gun. He sighed through his nose and stood up slowly. I can understand that. But really, I've been upfront with you to a degree. Can you say the same about the HLO's people? But if you still don't trust me, why don't you come by in the morning, maybe stick around with my people for a while? Maybe I can be the devil you know, opposed to the one you aren't sure about. Why would you do that? What do you want from me, Mr. Shaggy? Well, for one, you clearly have a vested interest in this neighborhood doing better. For another, a fine upstanding junior detective like yourself has to know a few people in the neighborhood, right? If we are going to save this place, we have to be united. Against the gangs, and the HLO. Allegedly the HLO. Derek corrected. Shaggy put up both his hands. Sure, allegedly. But you could introduce me to some people, right? Show me around? Maybe tell folks I'm not here to hurt any of them. You sure? The way I hear it, you therianthropes can get pretty brutal. Shaggy grinned savagely. Oh, we can get pretty nasty when we are defending our territory. But the citizens around here have nothing to fear from us. We just want to do business. It does sound like an aggravating situation. Derek continued to glare at Shaggy, eyes blazing. And then you turn up. A literal pack of wolves in a dying neighborhood. How do you think that looks? 'Cause I can tell you, it's not good. Shaggy shrugged. Which is why I said you can shadow me. See what we're about. I promise, the only thing I am interested in is making money. At least where this neighborhood is concerned. What about other neighborhoods? Shaggy merely smiled as he let Derek absorb his words. The young man was necessary to Shaggy's plans for the area. But having another local on board would help move things along. Also, establishing themselves as white knights in the neighborhood was always the plan. Derek wrestled with his thoughts for a short while. In the meantime, gunshots and shouts echoed through the streets. Shaggy ignored them as he slowly stuck a hand out. So what do you say, Mr. Perez? Care to help a businessman get his operation off the ground? Derek stared at the hand, an unsure expression on his face. You know what they say about shaking hands with the devil, don't you? Hee hee. I promise you can count your fingers right after I let go. You might even find a couple extra. Derek scoffed again, but still didn't reach his hand out. Instead, he simply stared Shaggy in his face, clearly trying to read something. Eventually, the detective sighed and asked, Am I going to regret this? Who's to say? I have my interest and you have yours. But they are aligned and locked to this neighborhood. Is that enough? Was it smart to let that kid go? Rita asked as they walked down the street. Maybe. I don't honestly know. But we needed an in with the neighborhood. Someone who can spread the word. That's what Mr. Perez will do for us. If he survives the night, he'll be fine. He had both his guns, and he knows the neighborhood better than we do. Yeah, Rita. You should be more worried about us. We're the ones walking through the middle of Austin half naked. Sybil butted into the conversation from behind. Shaggy and Rita both turned around to see the others following them down the sidewalk. Each in whatever clothes they could steal from closed or abandoned stores. After the pack's transformations ended, they scrounged up an eclectic assortment of pants, shorts, and shirts. However, all of them were shoeless as they walked down the dark streets. Sybil herself was in short and a large torn hoodie. We're fine, Rita said. At least we have something to cover up and not stain Boss's tender sensibilities. Shaggy rolled his eyes. I don't know why you seem to want to walk around naked, Rita. But how about we avoid suspicion and find another store to loot? Preferably one with shoes. Rita snorted and tugged at the dress jacket she was wearing. She had refused to button the thing, so the skin of her stomach and chest peeked out around the beige fabric. Shaggy pointedly looked away as Rita chortled. Boss, you're like a 13-year-old kid. Propriety is a thing, Rita. Try to observe it. Bah. Keep your manners to yourself, boss. I look great and people should know it. The scaly lizard man in tight jeans moved aside and the cowboy in a licorice shirt and sweatpants scowled at them. Stanley nodded as he hugged his long trench coat to his body. Yeah, getting forced out of the shift sucked. I feel like I pulled all of my muscles and I am starving. Sybil perked up. Yeah, that should be our actual goal, boss. We need food. Shaggy sighed and nodded, but he didn't know where they would get anything. They were still a few blocks from the deli. He had wanted to finish scouting the area, but the pack had suddenly been pulled from their shifts. A surprising and annoying facet of their transformation, Shaggy had not been aware of. Now they were all naked and hungry. From his spot on the sidewalk, Shaggy could see multiple diners and tiny grocery stores. But all of them were abandoned and looked empty. He growled as he sniffed the air, trying to find something. The neighborhood still had a post-apocalyptic vibe to it. Only getting the sense from a few scared people and the lingering hints of gunpowder, Shaggy shook his head. There's nothing around here. I wouldn't be so sure of that. Ephemera said as she appeared right next to him. I think I've found something. Please be more vague. Shaggy said, rolling his eyes. What did you find? More troops, civilians, gangs? Maybe a large stash of food? I don't know what it is, boss. But when I see a large metal door, I kind of want to know what's behind it. You didn't check? Rita asked. Nope. I was a good girl and obeyed the boss's orders. No going off on my own. See? I can play nice? Shaggy ignored her as he glanced around in thought. Soon, he turned to the rest of his pack. They were putting up a good front, but they still looked tired. The shift and the run seemed to have taken a lot out of them. Did he want to risk them by taking a run at the unknown? As the thought shot through his head, his whole pack turned dirty glares on him. He could both feel and hear their discontent with his own thoughts. It was fairly disconcerting. To have your own thoughts questioned by feelings in your head. He gave them his best, you know what I mean, stare back. But all he got was a rush of disagreement. Fine. We'll check it out. Shaggy growled as he turned back to Effie. Lead the way. Ephemera's dark eyes seemed to sparkle with mirth as she hurried off. Rita and Sybil were hot on her heels as Shaggy checked on the others. Seacrass and Vic trundled along after the women, Seacrass giving him a toothy grin. Then Stanley and Tom passed by him. The lanky Tom was playing up his exhaustion to the point that Stanley was half carrying the man. The boy gave Shaggy an "it's fine" look and Shaggy shrugged. Bringing up the rear, Shaggy followed along and kept his eyes on the half-lit streets. The street lamps in the area were still working, but whatever was giving them juice was only delivering a small amount. An orange glow was being cast upon the streets and, rather than make things easier to see, it just made things look creepier. The sounds of gunfire in the distance made some brave souls peek out of their apartment windows. But when they saw Shaggy's half-naked crew walking down the street, they quickly ducked back inside. Shaggy spotted a few people in apartments or abandoned buildings, wielding weapons. It was only a few brief glimpses, but he was sure he spotted both laser and gunpowder weaponry. It looked like the few holdouts in the neighborhood were ready and willing to fight for their land. Shaggy wondered how the HLO and the city government were going to dislodge people like that. Although, maybe he was wrong. Maybe the city would see that some people weren't leaving and decide to move the HLO project elsewhere. It could happen. Ephemera led them up the block and around a corner to the east. They traveled half a block over and then crossed the street. Shaggy blinked as he noticed the crumbling columns and the large lettering on the front of the building. Ephemera was standing proudly on the steps leading up to the main doors of the building as the rest of the pack hurried to follow. You have got to be shitting me, Ephemera. Shaggy scowled as he rushed ahead. What? She asked, sounding legitimately confused. Thanks, Shaggy. I can read, you know. Why are we here? Ephemera walked up the stairs, Shaggy and the others following. Because why does a closed and abandoned bank have a locked door and still functioning vault door? Ephemera tapped the large wooden doors to the bank. Shaggy moved up and tried both the handles, but they were, indeed, locked. Ephemera smiled at him as she vanished and sunk into the wall. Growling, Shaggy turned to Seacrass and found the big lizard already moving. Sidestepping away, Shaggy waited for the crunching of the door. Instead, all he got was a dull thud and scraping metal. Seacrass looked around, clearly displeased. Sorry, boss. Tired. Shaggy nodding, understandingly, and moved to help the big lizard man. But Seacrass rushed to the door again. This time, he put his massive shoulder into it. The two wooden doors burst open and bits of wood and metal exploded from the impact site. Checking the streets, Shaggy saw they were still empty and waved everyone else inside. Inside the main hall of the bank, Ephemera was standing with her arms crossed. What took you so long? Shaggy noticed bits of chair, tables, and even a water fountain were spread out from the door. Someone had stacked a load of junk in front of the door. He waved at the detritus and Ephemera shrugged. I figured y'all would easily blast through a bunch of junk against a door. Well, we aren't at 100%, and neither are you. Ephemera simply scoffed and turned around. Behind him, Vic and Stanley were closing the large wooden doors. Which was a good idea. No need to signal that they were in here. Other than the 7-foot lizard crashing through a door. Seacrest winced at that thought and brushed debris from his scales. Sorry again, boss. Shaggy waved the big lizard off. No problem, see. I gave the order. But I think from here we should go for a gentler touch. Rita, Tom and Stanley to the front. Follow Ephemera to the vault. Sybil, Seacrest, Vic and I will clear this floor. I already checked this floor, boss. Ephemera grumbled. Besides, the fun stuff is downstairs. I'm not saying I don't trust your work, Ephemera. But multiple eyes on a task are always a good thing. Once we find nothing up here, we'll join you. Okay? The short, pale woman scowled, but seemed to agree as she spun on her heel and led the others toward the back of the room. Shaggy had everyone else split up and explore. But it was futile. All the tills were open, all the desks turned over or broken. He doubted that Effie had done all of it, but someone had looted the entire first floor. He almost wanted to sweep the upper floor as well, but he decided to wait. Why haven't you just walked through it? Protections? Ephemera nodded as she tapped a finger against the door. Yep. It's got some kind of force field on it that prevents me from phasing through. It covers the room behind as well. So whatever is back there has to be important, right? Shaggy looked around at the floor and ceiling near the door. They both were scorched black and the signs of explosions and powers were everywhere. But the door remained pristine, like nothing ever happened to it. Along the wall to the left of the door was a large crack where someone had tried to break through the wall with a hammer or similar. He blinked as he took in the destruction around the door. It was clearly protecting something amazing. But he doubted his crew was going to get into it anytime soon. Ephemera nearly stomped a foot as she whirled on him. Oh, come on, boss. Don't give up before you even try. Shaggy sighed. Ephemera, we are all tired, hungry, and weak. What do you think I can do to this door that Stanley or Seacrest can't? You can grow into that beast man thing and rip through this thing, can't you? While I appreciate your estimation of my strength, I highly doubt I can do that. Can't you at least try? Ephemera pleaded. Shaggy checked his inner wolf and found the creature sluggish, but awake. He probably had enough for a quick transformation. But he would not come out of it feeling great. The others all crowded around him. Not pressuring him, but clearly all wanting him to try. With another sigh, Shaggy focused his emotions back down into the wolf. The beast perked its head up sleepily, and almost begrudgingly, Shaggy felt the shift take him. Soon he was standing next to the door, his eyeline right along the top of it. Feeling his transformation already slipping, Shaggy lurched for one of the wheels on the front of the door. He wrapped his lanky fingers around the handle of the wheel and pulled with as much might as he could muster. The metal screeched, but stayed stubbornly still. The vault door didn't budge at all as he wrestled with the handle, trying to get a proper handle to wrench the thing around. But his transformation was ending. Shaggy could feel it as he put all of his weight into it and tried to yank the door open. He pulled twice, and the door seemed to groan. Emboldened, Shaggy went for a last pull. As he threw his body backwards and his arms became taut, Shaggy heard a loud screech of metal. He stumbled backward as he lost his footing, the wheel of the door still in his shrinking hands. Someone caught him as he stumbled backwards, shifting back to his human shape. As he did, the large wheel of the vault door crashed to the floor. He had ripped the thing off the door entirely, but the vault was still stubbornly closed. See, Shaggy panted. It was pointless. Shaggy wheezed as Vic and Stanley helped steady him. His inner wolf growled warningly at him before it ducked its head under its paws and fell asleep. Shaggy chuckled at his mindscape and focused back on the vault. Effie and Rita were standing in front of it and he felt a strange sense of success from both of them. They moved apart, and Shaggy spotted something glittering inside the vault door. There was a space in the door where he ripped the wheel from. A small square that had been behind the wheel. It showered them in a small yellow light and Shaggy blinked as he stumbled forward. Inside the space, hidden within the door, was a golden keyhole that shone with an almost holy light. The plate around the keyhole was a shining golden color with small jewels inset around it. Shaggy swallowed in awe as he almost reached a finger toward the keyhole. But Rita gripped his arm. "I think that's enough for one night. Don't you, boss?" Shaggy heard Ephemera huff, and that seemed to bring him out of his stupor. Rita was right, they weren't ready for whatever this door was hiding. But he promised himself they would be. Soon. With a tired nod, Shaggy led the way back toward the surface. They all remained weirdly silent, each of them deep in thought about the vault. That golden light tugged at Shaggy's gaming senses and thoughts of epic loot behind the vault door. But his thoughts were rudely interrupted by the sounds of buzzing and amplified voice booming through the bank. "This is the police. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Shaggy immediately started calculating how to get his pack out of the bank. The cops clearly said the building was surrounded. But how complete was that coverage? Tom and Ephemera could probably make it out. But for the rest, it was going to be a slugfest. A sharp blow smacked Shaggy in the back of the head. "Boss, would you please stop discounting our abilities?" Rita growled angrily. "I'm not. But we are tired, unable to shift, and surrounded. I don't see us fighting our way out and succeeding. So the next step is getting as many of you out as I can. That's my job. Now, Effie, can you scout, where is she?" Shaggy stopped mid-sentence when he realized that the pale woman was gone. Checking his pack link, he found her already fulfilling the orders he was about to give. She was moving unseen around the building, looking for a weak point. The amplified voice threatened them again, but Shaggy ignored it as they waited. A plan slowly forming in his mind. Rita shot him another dirty look, but he merely shrugged, as it was the only way he could think to get his people to safety. The others watched the exchange. But by the looks on their faces, they clearly agreed with Rita. Shaggy sighed. "Look, you lot need to escape so you can free me later. I'll be fine in lockup for a few hours. What do they have on me? Trespassing? What about escaping arrest? We broke you out of a prison transport, remember?" Sybil said pointedly. "Then you can do it again, if I need it. But I want y'all safe. You hear? Me?" His entire pack glared at him with an odd mix of happiness and annoyance. It was clear that every one of them would happily follow him straight to prison. But Shaggy didn't know how this confrontation with the game's police was going to go. One of them might catch an unlucky bullet and, in their weakened state, be unable to heal it. Shaggy had already decided that he was not losing any of his pack. Ephemera phased back into the large main hall of the bank. "Boss, the southern side is the weakest. Just 3 rookies looking shaky. In fact, most of the cops outside look a little wet behind the ears. I think we can take them." "Yeah, but we don't have to." Shaggy grinned. "Y'all just need to punch your way through as quietly as possible. So you and Tom deal with the rookies, and I'll go do what needs to be done." "Boss." "Fine, but let me do it." Rita sighed as she began looking around. Shaggy blew out a breath and prepared himself as Rita picked up something from the floor. The scattered detritus and junk on the floor was an eclectic pile. But Shaggy was still surprised when the woman turned to reveal a sharp-looking bit of metal. She spun on Shaggy as it glinted in the little light they had. "What the hell is that?" Shaggy wondered. Rita twisted the chunky bit of metal in her hand. "I think it was a name placard or something. It'll do, right?" "Yeah, just get it over with." Shaggy braced himself again as he looked at his pack. "Effie and Tom, do your thing. I'm going to distract them as long as IURK. Damn, Rita. You didn't have to cut him that deep." Vic shouted. "It has to look real," Rita argued. "Well, he is certainly bleeding a lot," Stanley added. Shaggy grimaced as the jagged bit of metal had left a long scar down his bare chest. Looking into Rita's eyes, he could see a bit of resentment in them. but he also could feel her disgust at having cut him. Although that did nothing to make it hurt less. He stumbled backwards a few steps, letting the placard finally leave his body. With a finally grimace at his wolves, Shaggy spun. "Get out of here. I've got some acting to do." He felt his pack slowly pull away as he stumbled toward the front door. Practicing what he wanted to say in his head, Shaggy made it to the front door as the voice outside was giving its fourth or fifth warning. His regeneration was gone, spent with his man-beast form. Now he was a bleeding man, about to have a pleasant conversation with the police. Police that had somehow found them in a deserted part of the city, in a defunct bank, where the cops were known for not showing up. The whole thing smelled to high heaven, to Shaggy. So he was ready to go get some answers. But first he needed to engage in a little theater. A show for the cameras and drones that he could hear buzzing beyond the door. He winced as he bloodied up his hands with his blood. With a ragged breath, Shaggy pushed open the bank door and ran out screaming. Arghahar. Shaggy held his bloody hands up as he stumbled forward into the bright lights. He couldn't see the police behind the bright flood lamps. But red and blue colors mixed with the white light. That, combined with the sudden and alarm-sounding chatter filling the air, told Shaggy that he had successfully gotten their attention. Target sighted. A wounded man has exited the building. Restrain him. Are there others? Take him. Shaggy blinked away the spots in his eyes as two sharp cracks filled the air. A long line of fully armored police standing behind a barricade filled his vision. As his screaming petered out, Shaggy felt two painful points hit him in the chest. The buzzing in the air grew muffled, and the cops seemed to slow down as they jumped the barriers and rushed him. Shaggy felt his entire world tilt as his legs folded beneath him. He spotted several armored cops throwing themselves at him as everything went dark. Shaggy sat in the darkness for a while, wondering if he was going to get another death screen. But instead, he awoke suddenly and roughly, to a light being shone in his eye. Instinctively, he brought his hand up. The sound of metal clinking came from his wrist as he did. Oh shit! He's loose. Shaggy blinked as he brushed away the pen light being shone into his face. What dash? Zap. A sharp electric shock singed Shaggy's chest hair as the guy in a white coat moved away. Shaggy tried to look around as his muscles seized up. He was in a clean white room, a heavy wooden door sitting against the far wall stood open as uniformed men rushed into the room. He was on a cushioned bed and he had a slim metal ring around his wrist. It took another few seconds for him to realize it was a piece of a handcuff. All the while, he was getting shocked by a screaming guard. Shaggy couldn't even scream as the guard forcibly jabbed him with a shock baton. The snap hiss sound filled the air along with the stench of Shaggy's skin burning. But apparently, none of the additional guards entering the room saw fit to stop the whole fiasco. Instead, they all stood at the edges of the room, looking like they were waiting their turn to shock Shaggy. The doctor or scientist or whatever was removed from the room quickly as more guards rushed inside. Shaggy sat back as best he could and tried to focus on something else. Even as his muscles and skin held in pain. He even briefly thought about memorizing every cop in the room's faces. But he didn't have the clout to start killing cops willy-nilly. At least not yet. But someone was going to get smacked for this. Shaggy would make sure of it. Officer. I think you got him. A voice shouted from the door. Shaggy jerkily glanced over, even as the baton was jammed into his stomach again. Shaggy growled against the pain. Which, surprisingly, made the young officer tossing him stop. Shaggy wanted to slap himself. If he had known it was that easy, he'd have done it earlier. The scared officer seemed to recognize that he had been scared and immediately rushed Shaggy again. But the voice from the door boomed again. Stop. The entire room shuddered and the bed Shaggy was on slid across the floor. All the various cops in the room were shoved into the walls or onto the floor. The young officer trying to shock Shaggy caught the worst of it. He was picked up by the noise and slammed into the far wall, embedding into it fully. As his bed hit the far wall, Shaggy finally got a look at the cop at the door. The man was older, hair graying in places, and he held himself a little straighter than the thugs in blue on the floor. He appeared human, but Shaggy wasn't going to guess at that. Not with the sonic shockwave the man just sent through the room. Multiple cops glared at the older man as he stepped further into the room. He returned their glare with one of his own. The stare down lasted a few seconds, with the older man the clear victor. "Sir, the prisoner was escaping," a cop said. "Don't bullshit me, Clancy. I was watching the cameras." He broke the cuffs and Gomez near shocked him to death. "What I want to know is why none of you stopped him." The older man glared around the room. Shaggy took the time to check his hands and body. He had a large black bit of skin near his midsection where the cop, Gomez, had tried to fry him. But otherwise, the large cut on his chest had been stitched back up. A quick mental check showed that he had not regained his healing powers yet. "Lieutenant. You know who they say this guy is? What they say he has done?" Another cop yelled. The lieutenant's shout shook the room again. But not as hard as before. The cops in the room stood around like a bunch of kids caught shoplifting. None of them met the lieutenant's gaze as he scanned the room for an answer. Seeing that no one was forthcoming with answers, the old man sighed. "Oh, I don't believe we need to do all of that, Lieutenant," said a silky smooth voice from the door. Shaggy grimaced as he looked up and spotted a slim alien woman leaning against the doorframe. Her green hair was in a tight bun and her gray business suit contrasted harshly with her brown complexion. Shaggy almost thought she had some kind of skin condition. But then he realized her skin was literally wood. She was a tree lady, or maybe a dryad of some kind. "Mrs. LeBlanc, our department thanks the HLO for its input on this matter. But I, personally, feel that your services are no longer required here. The suspect has been apprehended. Your oversight is no longer required." Ms. LeBlanc tittered, and the sound turned Shaggy's spine to glass. It was a chilling sound with no joy in it at all. Combined with the dead-eyed stare she was giving the lieutenant, Shaggy was surprised the man could remain stone-faced. Tree Lady brushed a strand of her green hair out of her face and walked into the room. "Thankfully, I don't answer to you, Lieutenant Anders. Otherwise these fine, upstanding officers would not know how dangerous or evil this particular soup is. Captain Jacques, however, seems more willing to let me do my job. Your job is to inform my men about soup criminals the HLO knows about. Not fill their heads with your biased rhetoric. The courts will determine if this man is guilty, not the HLO. But until then, I want him restrained and looked after in accordance with the law. Which you are not qualified or permitted to do. Therefore, you have no reason to be in this room. I suggest you return to your office and continue your liaison duties. Whatever they may be." Shaggy didn't know a tree could grow red with anger. But Ms. LeBlanc looked ready to explode before she spun on her heel and marched from the room. A fair few of the cops in the room hurried after her. Shaggy blew out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The sound brought the lieutenant around to stare at him. Shaggy met the older man's eyes and tried his best not to wince from the pain in his body. The room was slowly emptying as another voice spoke up from the door. Is it safe to re-enter?" The lieutenant maintained his glare on Shaggy as he swiveled his head. "Yes, Doctor. The situation has been resolved. Please attend to your patient." A skinny man in a doctor's coat crept through the room slowly. Eyes trained on Shaggy. But Shaggy ignored the man as he kept his eyes on the older man. His competitive streak had been ignited as they stared at each other, and Shaggy told himself he wasn't going to blink first. His and the lieutenant's staring contest made the doctor freeze. "Are you sure he is properly restrained?" Lieutenant Anders blinked and glanced down at Shaggy's arms. Shaggy celebrated in his head at having won their little game. But with nothing to distract him, he was back to thinking about how his everything hurt. He groaned and leaned back on his bed, even as his nerve endings screamed at him. The doctor took a large step back and ran into the lieutenant, clearly afraid. Anders sighed and called through the still open door. Get us some proper cuffs in here. C-tier, with auto-fit and magical protections. Ah, there goes my epic escape plan. Shaggy wheezed as the doctor examined him. I had this whole song and dance number planned out. But it doesn't work if my hands are tied. Lieutenant Anders simply glared at him as a trio of cops came in and carefully replaced Shaggy's handcuffs. He didn't move or try to break away. Mostly because he was still injured and not because Anders was watching him unblinkingly, waiting for any sudden movements. Once the cuffs were on, everyone in the room relaxed, and the doctor continued his prodding. Shouldn't you be shooting me up with some healing potions or something, Doc? I mean, I'm half dead here. Anders snorted as the doctor shook his head. No. I've been given strict instructions not to heal or feed you. Apparently, you have extraordinary healing capabilities which are tied to food. We don't want you making an actual escape attempt. Oh, we are scraping your genetics and cross-checking them with the information the HLO provided us with. If the two match, then you are our guy and court proceedings can begin. It will also give us a good gauge of your abilities so we can have the proper responses in place if you go on a rampage. So I'm going to court, huh? That's a foregone conclusion? Shaggy smiled at Lieutenant Anders. Anders sighed. I don't know who you pissed off, but the HLO have fast-tracked your processing. They want you ready and waiting to stand trial as soon as possible. Shaggy was about to ask on what charges, but he thought better of it and kept his mouth shut. Instead, he turned contemplative as the doctor poked and prodded him. Anders seemed to study him as well. Probably trying to figure out what the HLO wanted with him. Shaggy could guess. They probably wanted to make an example of him or parade him through the neighborhood as a criminal. Don't trust the big bad wolf in your midst, people. Anders suddenly spun on his heel and marched from the room. He got to the door before he called over his shoulder. I'll see you get a fair trial. But if half of what the HLO is claiming about you is true, then I hope they put you away for a long time. Shaggy chuckled, but it hurt his chest too much, so he ended up coughing through his response. Ack. Who? Me? I'm a cough saint. Anders didn't respond as he left the room and closed the door. Shaggy could see the man take up a post in front of the door and he sighed in relief. He sat back as the doctor pinched him on the arm with something. Shaggy felt an icy feeling run up his arm as the doctor chuckled. I wouldn't get too comfortable. Mr. Robertson. The company is going to make an example of you very soon. Shaggy blinked at the cold tone in the doctor's voice. Looking down, he noticed the doctor removing a vial of his blood from the syringe. The doctor glanced up at him and Shaggy twisted his head in confusion. Had the doctor's eyes always been slit like that? He looked like a snake. The doctor pulled the vial away and pocketed it as he smiled at Shaggy. Pulling a blue vial from the same pocket, the doctor said. Don't worry. We will put your blood to good use while you are in jail. Shaggy tried to thrash against the bed, but the new cuffs actually did their job very well. He did little more than rattle the bed as the doctor placed the blue vial into an injector and stuck Shaggy in the arm. This will keep you compliant as we prepare the show. We don't want to ruin the surprise, though. So you just go to sleep and we'll get everything ready for you. That's it, go to sleep now. Shaggy fought against the drowsiness that hit him. The blue liquid seemed to rush through his veins, and he felt his body going completely numb. Shaggy could do little more than glare at the snake-like doctor as he continued his pantomime. Thoughts and ideas rushed through Shaggy's brain all at once until he finally succumbed to the drugs and fell asleep. Blissfully unaware of the show that awaited him. Shaggy awoke in another room. The white walls and fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by bright beige walls and actual sunlight. He was in a large, carpeted room. 2 couches sat in the middle, a brown coffee table between them. On the far wall ahead of him were 3 floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the yellow streams of sunlight. A drinks cart and some cookies were placed beside one of the couches, and Shaggy spotted a young man idly sipping a drink and munching on snacks. Shaggy himself was leaned against a wall. His arms held fast to his body by some weird silvery metal. It was like a straitjacket was molded to his torso. His legs and waist were strapped to whatever he was laying against. Shaggy rolled his eyes as a thought occurred to him. Please tell me they aren't going to roll me out on a dolly like some kind of maniac. He groaned. The young man gave a start. Cookie crumbs falling from his face. He was a slight, brown-haired man, wearing a suit that was at least a size too big for him. Shaggy could see the kid was looking over a data tablet on the coffee table. The young man gulped noticeably before he affected a smile. Nope. It's a raised repulsor platform, actually. Fitted with a moldy metal vest and heavy caliber restraints. You've been deemed an escape risk. So the HLO called for the maximum level restraints. I think it's, a little excessive. Huh. Shaggy rolled his eyes. Either way, they are wheeling me around on this thing, right? Floating you around. But I take your point. Booby, but don't worry. I didn't allow them to take or do anything untoward. You're my first client, but even I know prosecutors can't just go around touching the defendant. Shaggy coughed. Whoa. I'm already at trial? What the hell? What happened to due process? Do the HLO get to just step all over that? The man straightened his suit jacket. Well, no. But they lobbied to expedite the case. You have been deemed a significant enough threat to warrant such actions. Dangerous supers need to be contained as soon as possible. So the judge granted the motion and my firm was tapped to defend you, Mr. Robertson. And as the lowest-ranking lawyer, you got stuck with the job, huh? The young lawyer got a sour look on his face, but didn't disagree. He quickly rallied his facial features and put a smile back on his face, though. I assure you, I'm licensed to practice super/enhanced law in the state of Texas. So you have nothing to worry about there. As a C-tier super, you rate high enough for an Ultramax prison, though. But I believe with the plea deal presented we can. Plea deal? Yes. The prosecution has offered a substantial deal. Which I think you would be a fool to ignore. They are offering a reduced sentence in a modified Supermax for a plea of guilty. With good behavior, you'd be out in 35 to 40 years. Shaggy blinked, fixing what was apparently his lawyer with a glare. The bright young man simply smiled as Shaggy tried to suss him out. He couldn't decide if the young man was stupid or on the HLO's take. Either way, Shaggy would not be taking any deal. His lawyer kept smiling even as Shaggy shifted in his uncomfortable metal jacket. The thought of attempt to shift crossed his mind. But he set that aside for now. He kinda wanted to know about the state's case against him. If he was going to have any way out of this, it would take patience and insight. Which had Shaggy anxious. Ahem, so I won't be going with any deal. How about you explain the state's case against me? The young lawyer grimaced. I don't advise you to take this path. The case against you is strong, as are most these days. But I feel I should inform you it's not the state making a case, it's the HLO itself. How is that a thing? Well, the HLO control a huge portion of the city's drones and maintains the storage area where the footage is housed. Not to mention the genetic records of all supers operating in the city. So any case against a super is tried as the HLO versus that individual. In this case, it is the HLO versus Shaggy Robertson. Shaggy filed that info away and tried to keep his mind on the task at hand. What are the charges? The younger man sighed and adjusted his tie. He went to say something, but apparently thought better of it. Instead, he spun toward the coffee table and picked up the data tablet. With a quick few scrolls, he went over Shaggy's various crimes. Looks like we have multiple cases of resisting arrest, assault against HLO-registered supes, fleeing the police, and vigilantism. Also, there is your escape from custody, the murder of George Allen and various misdemeanors. Most of which were caught on camera. Sure. What does the video show exactly? Mr. Robertson, as your lawyer, I cannot recommend this course of action. Show me the video, kid, and maybe you'll actually win this case. The lawyer didn't look convinced, but he swiped his finger across the tablet a few more times. Eventually, he spun the slim blue tablet around and showed it to Shaggy. A video was playing of him and Slink running away from the cops. He was in his old brown wolf form, fighting off the multicolored motorcycle riders. Shaggy snorted. That's not my wolf. Beg your pardon? My wolf is a big black one with horns. A symbol of my devotion to the blood god. Shaggy intoned sagely, hoping it made him sound legitimate. The prosecution says that they have DNA evidence, which was taken unlawfully while I was in police custody. Also, they didn't read me my rights. Doesn't that mean that all this is moot? The young man sighed again. No. It just means that any evidence they gathered after arresting you is inadmissible. Did they interrogate you after arrest? No. They tried to fry me to death and stole my blood. But they didn't talk to me. So, the genetic evidence is yours? The one they gathered at the police station. Do they have any evidence from this instance? His lawyer scanned back through his tablet for a few seconds. No. The evidence they have was gathered during the George Allen incident. It says here you took part in a riot and injured or outright killed several gang members. The nature of the night and who you hurt allows us some leeway. But it's not a lot. There was a riot in the street. I had to fight my way out. The whole incident can be chalked up to self-defense, can't it? But you're a soup. That means any action you take against criminals is automatically vigilantism. Shaggy nodded. I can accept that. But that doesn't mean I killed George. We fought, but I was tossed through a building. The man swiped through the tablet again. This time, visibly excited. The drone footage is extremely unclear. But the heat signature shows an enormous mass being tossed away. Is that you? Are there any other large, four-footed signatures in the area? Shaggy asked, exasperated. No. Just you, George, and the weird armored guy. This could work. But what about the escape from custody charge? You knowingly fled from police custody. Shaggy tried to shrug in his metal vest. Hey, the transport was under attack. A few of the other prisoners died. I had to get out of there. I was fleeing for my life. His lawyer nodded idly as he swiped. Okay, so we may have an argument there. It doesn't look like there were any survivors of the incident and drone footage is choppy. Clearly, it's from the PD's drones. But then why didn't you surrender to the police when you got away? Hey, the police already proved a poor defense to whatever hit that convoy. How was I to know that I'd be safe back in police custody? Shaggy said, spinning fast. For all I knew, the people who hit the convoy were after me. His lawyer nodded a few more times, carefully looking over his tablet. Eventually, he sighed. So I guess we are entering a plea of not guilty? Shaggy nodded. Of course. I'll admit guilt on the vigilantism. But that's it. Okay, I'll go get started on the paperwork. We'll enter arraignment here in a few hours. Just relax and don't do anything stupid. There are dozens of HLO-sponsored supers out in the hall. Shaggy nodded idly as a weird scent hit his nose. He was searching the room for it as his lawyer opened the door to leave. Oh, I forgot to mention. My name is Mr. Eridu, and I'm part of the Tudo agency. Glad to be working with you. Me too. Shaggy said, still searching the room for the familiar scent. Once Eridu was out the door, the scent became stronger and Shaggy realized where he had smelled it before. Mr. White phased into the room like a ghost. His white suit shining in the sunlight. The snow-white alien man was grinning as he removed his hat and bowed to Shaggy. masterfully argued Mr. Robertson. You have brought up a few sticking points in my people's case against you. But I can assure you none of them will work. Shaggy grunted and actually attempted to flex out of his iron vest. But the thing seemed to flex with him and then constrict twice as hard. He winced against the pain as he said, "Maybe. But you have to try, right?" "No, Shaggy. You certainly do not. In fact, I would prefer it if you would simply roll over and play dead, as it were. But you seem dead set on fighting us." Mr. White sighed dramatically. "Well, I don't want to make it too easy for the globe-spanning corporate entity. If I can make you lot get some dirt under your fingernails, it'll be a good day." Mr. White raised a pale hand, black fingernails reflecting the sunlight. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the grime under my nails, Mr. Robertson." "Really? You know you said something similar last time. Something about terror. I have to say, Whitey, if a court case is all you people in the HLO can manage, I am not impressed. Or maybe you meant more of your stooges. You going to sick your cat on me again? We can have it out right in the courtroom." Mr. White snorted. "Humph, Mr. Ryle is a little too mercenary for my taste. Although I will have to retract his payment. He claimed to have killed you outright. But that is no matter. You are firmly within our grasp, Mr. Robertson. So wiggle all you want, play your games, spout your nonsense. But in the end, you apparently didn't even warrant the terror I can inflict. Soon you will go the way of Cog and find yourself banished to a, how did you put it? A place worse than hell? I think we at the HLO can find you such a place." "Oh great, you're going to make me a file clerk?" Shaggy quipped as Mr. White faded away. The smug bastard's grin seemed to linger, as he didn't answer Shaggy. Instead, the pale alien left as secretly as he came. But his words about Cog stuck with Shaggy. The inkling of an idea formed in Shaggy's mind as Mr. Eridu came back in. His lawyer started to quickly go over what was going to happen during arraignment. But Shaggy was only half listening, the other half was doing something Shaggy absolutely hated, digging through the in-game forums. Shaggy's arraignment went as he expected. The judge laid out the facts of the case and explained each charge against him. When Eridu entered his not guilty plea, though, things ground to a halt. Shaggy was still on his personal dolly, so he couldn't turn very well to see the prosecution. But the judge had a sour look on his face. Apparently, he had been expected to roll over. With each charge where Shaggy pleaded not guilty, the judge's face grew more and more grim. When Shaggy's only guilty plea, vigilantism, was entered, the judge sighed theatrically. "Mr. Robertson, the HLO has an ironclad case here. I am talking genetic evidence, recording drone footage, and witness testimony. Are you set on taking this course of action?" Shaggy grinned as he glared up at the judge. As restrained as he was, Shaggy was having fun with the entire process. "Your Honor, I also have recordings. As well as decent arguments for all charges. Which may not grant me an acquittal, but will clear up some mistakes the prosecution has made. Although, I haven't had time to gather witnesses." The judge's face turned red, and he coughed angrily. Shaggy tried to turn again to see the prosecution. But his head was still strapped to the damn dolly they had him on. A smooth and casual voice spoke from near him, though, filling the near-empty room with its sickeningly saccharine tone. "Your Honor, if Mr. Shaggy wants to drag this out in court, then I say we let him." The judge's eyes were on the speaker, somewhere off to Shaggy's left. The chubby, pale-green alien nodded his head in approval a few times. Shaggy rolled his eyes at the obvious and blatant subservience. The damn bastard was clearly on the HLO's payroll. Shaggy stopped paying attention at that point. The judge droned on about what was going to happen, but Shaggy ignored it as he initiated his own batch of surprises. They wheeled Shaggy out, Mr. Eridu walking alongside. It was then that Shaggy got his first glimpse of the prosecution. One human male and two aliens. All in tight black suits. They were chatting away happily as Shaggy was wheeled back to his own room in the building. His bench trial was scheduled for that evening, which was ridiculously fast. The suit stopped talking as Shaggy drew past them, but said nothing. One lawyer sneered at him, her large tusks making the gesture appear hostile. Shaggy merely winked at her and snuggled back into his less than comfortable ride. Mr. Eridu stayed quiet until they got back to their room. 2 large guards in heavy tactical armor were stationed outside, although Shaggy didn't think they were necessary. Between the heavily reinforced door and him being strapped to a damn dolly in a metal straitjacket, he wasn't going anywhere. "What footage are you talking about?" Mr. Eridu asked. "Before that, can we get a new judge? This one is obviously tainted by the opposition," Shaggy asked. His lawyer brushed a hand down his face. "Yeah, but I doubt it will work. We'd have to prove some kind of tampering or bias somehow. I can get the paperwork submitted, though." "Do that. Also, be on the lookout for a reporter somewhere in front of the courthouse. Her name is Ruby Shroud." Mr. Eridu glared at him, but Shaggy ignored it. He was busy on the in-game forums, sending Ms. Shroud a criminal amount of credits for her footage. She was an in-game super reporter, able to hear the smallest bit of news and hunt down the tiniest lead. At least, that's how she presented herself. But with the speed with which she compiled all the footage on the COG raid, maybe she was worth it. Shaggy's plan had been to buy himself some leniency with his participation in the COG raid. He had performed a public service by killing the bastard. Thanks to the number of players that were recording the event, he had a large swath of footage that proved that he had not only taken part, but was responsible for COG's death, which he was sure would buy him some goodwill with any normal judge. But the chubby green asshole on the bench right now probably wouldn't give him a chance. Mr. Eridu surprised Shaggy by returning not with Ms. Shroud's footage, but with Ms. Shroud herself. The player took one look at Shaggy and busted out laughing. Her flat cap nearly fell from her head as she guffawed at Shaggy's predicament. Over her shoulder, Shaggy could see the telltale shimmer of invisible recording cameras. They twisted the light around themselves and almost telegraphed their presences to other players, making the invisible part kind of pointless. Ruby Shroud snorted as her laughter died off. Adjusting her oversized green jacket, she said, "So the great Shaggy has been laid low by the justice system, huh?" "The great? Really? I'm just the asshat who got lucky with COG. Did you bring the vids?" Ruby shook her head. "Nah, you're not getting away that easily. Especially now from the looks of it. I've heard that you had a personal stake in the COG situation. Something about a blood god and broken promises? Any comment?" Shaggy sighed and rolled his eyes. "Seriously, you're playing the reporter shtick now? Come on. I need that footage. Please. I'm a professional. I have the compiled footage of your glorious actions during the raid, as well as some juicy tidbits from witnesses and even a spot with a registered super. So how about a little info for the camera? You get experience for this, don't you?" "Of course. The more noteworthy the story, the more XP I get. Plus, it is actually good practice for real life. So can you comment on the Blood God connection?" "Yes, I am the champion of Zane the Blood God. COG reneged on a deal with my patron and I was tapped to put him down. Happy now?" Ruby's pearly smile widened as she nodded. "Oh yeah, recorded footage of your connection to an in-game god. Excellent stuff. How about the rumor about the romantic relationship between your god and the Mad Witch Corrigan?" Shaggy blinked. "Yeah, I'm not touching that one. I recommend you not call her that to her face, though. She'd fry your ass." "Huh. Fair," Ruby said as she summoned one of her invisible cameras to her side. With a few keystrokes and some menu work, Ruby pulled a data stick from thin air. Introducing player-edited footage into the game was always tricky. But Shaggy was sure the game's AI would handle everything fine. Ruby checked her menus again, probably looking for Shaggy's payment. Once she confirmed she got paid, Ruby slapped the stick into Erado's hand. "I need to go submit this as evidence," Erado said. "Make a copy first," Shaggy shouted as his lawyer bolted from the room. "Please." "I got you, Shags." Ruby smirked as she pulled another data stick from her menus. "I always keep copies. No sense in my ass getting burned." "So what's the HLO got on you?" "How do you know it's the HLO?" "The HLO damn near tries everyone. It's why most of these little proceedings are all bench trials. It's fast, efficient and clean. The win rate for prosecutors is over 95% in the game. Which is in no small part because of the player base. A bunch of people who went vigilante got snagged early and were immediately tried and convicted. It was wild. They got a bunch of nonsense on me. But they are making it looking bigger than it is." Ruby's small button nose twitched as she sniffed the air. Shaggy eyed her wearily as she pushed closer to his restrained form. Her eyes fluttered as she continued to sniff the surrounding air. "Oh yeah. You smell like trouble, Shaggy. What's going on here? What the hell was that? I can literally smell a lead in a potential case. But don't change the subject. What's going on with the HLO?" Shaggy rolled his eyes again. "It's a long story, and I don't think you want to play with these people, Ruby. The HLO plays rough and they are out for keeps now." "Bah. I'm a player. I'll survive. But I can't help but feel this branch of the HLO is up to something." "So what's the skinny?" "I don't know if what I have is it. But the HLO is trying to push a portion of the population out of a neighborhood." "Why?" Ruby asked excitedly, her cameras hovering around. "Because they want to build their damn hero academy." Ruby fell deep into thought as Shaggy tried to not think about the itch on his elbow. His moldy metal jacket was pissing him off again. But he was still low on healing power. While he had rested and his health had been restored, if he played by his old rules, he'd get chopped to pieces. He needed food. Badly. He was about to ask Ruby if she had any when she took off her cap to scratch her head. Shaggy blinked as two furry cat ears stood out from Ruby's head. Glancing around, he found a long furry tail sticking out behind her green coat. He hadn't expected the reporter to be a cat girl, not with her overly human features. But after some thought, he brushed it off. Hybrids were a thing. Ruby caught him staring at her ears, and one of them flicked forward. "Yes. There's an alien race of cat people. Big surprise. How do you think I get my news stories? I literally thought you were a super reporter." Shaggy blurted, unthinkingly. "What? Like I had super reporting powers? What the hell, dude? I don't know, okay? Besides, why would you even choose a species like that? You know how some of the fans of catgirls get, right? How have you not been mobbed everywhere you go?" Ruby groaned as she slammed her hat back on her head. "Why do you think I wear all these clothes? Everywhere I go, there is some asshole asking me to end my sentences with NYA. Like they lose all their damn sense when they see the ears and tail or something. So, why did you do it? I didn't think it would be that bad. Also, the ears are super sensitive to sound and I'm sneaky as hell. Not to mention, smelling trouble wasn't a clever euphemism. I can literally smell when it's time to head for the hills. Like a danger sense? Shouldn't that mean that you need to run away from me?" Ruby snorted. "Oh, you're not that bad. You smell just enough to be interesting. Although the stench flares up whenever someone mentions the HLO. But that just creates an itch I need to scratch. You know what they say about curiosity in cats?" Shaggy deadpanned. Ruby chuckled as the door to the room opened and Erado walked back in. The young lawyer looked haggard and sweaty as he dashed over toward Shaggy. He glanced between Ruby and Shaggy a few times until Shaggy gave the man a nod. Erado straightened up and announced, "The paperwork for a change of judge is in and is likely to go to both parties soon." We'll get an arbiter down here soon and they'll hear our evidence. Shaggy did his best to roll his shoulders. So the first step is discrediting the judge. Oh, Ruby chuckled as she glanced at Eridu. We need evidence of wrongdoing on the judge's part, Shaggy. Shaggy grimaced as he cast his mind about for an idea. Ruby sauntered over to the couch and sat down. She gave Shaggy a grin and he wanted to strangle the cat girl. What do you got? He asked the other player. Right now? Nothing. But get me some credits and a computer and I can work some magic. I don't want to be hearing this, do I? Eridu exclaimed, covering his ears and moving away from Shaggy. How much? Shaggy asked, ignoring his lawyer. 2,500 credits and a computer. But if there's nothing there proving you right, I get to keep the money. Deal. Shaggy said, bringing up his in-game menus and getting a credit transfer ready. Ruby stood up again, tail twitching happily. Also, I want in. Excuse me? Shaggy said, sending the money and closing his windows. I want to be front and center when whatever happens to you happens. I feel it is going to be big. Shaggy eyed the curious catgirl for a few seconds. Partially wishing he hadn't already spent the money. Not that he doubted the player's goals. But he really didn't want to bring a catgirl back home to Levy. She would never let him hear the end of it. Growling over his shoulder, Shaggy addressed Eridu. Get her a computer, Eridu. You people are going to get me fired. I just know it, Eridu exclaimed, rushing back out of the room.